Chapter 466. Early in the morning of April 29th, Michael Eisner arrived at the global headquarters more than 20 minutes early as usual. Before entering the office, he couldn't wait to ask his assistant, "Did you find out about that matter?" "Yes, Mr. Eisner. I have sorted out the materials and placed them on your desk." "Very good." Michael Eisner nodded, pushed the door open and walked into his office. There was a red folder on the wide desk. After Michael Eisner sat down, he couldn't wait to open it. When Columbia announced the layoffs, Michael Eisner was keener than others to feel that this matter must be related to the cooperation agreement between Columbia and Firefly some time ago. So he was very concerned about the follow-up of this matter from the beginning. 3 days ago, Columbia directly closed the branches in several small countries in South America. When Michael Eisner heard the news, he was almost certain that these departments were taken over by Firefly. Obviously, this was a secret agreement between Firefly and Columbia's Peter Guber. As the former CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner knew better than anyone that the only shortcoming of Disney was overseas distribution. This was also the reason why he had been promoting the development of Boway International Distribution since he took charge of Disney. However, although Boway International broke away from the cooperation with Warner 2 years ago and tried to distribute alone, Boway International's overseas distribution ability was still incomparable with several other established distribution companies with decades of overseas distribution accumulation. Therefore, after the combination of Firefly and Disney, the overseas distribution strength was still insufficient. Columbia was different. Among the 7 major film companies in Hollywood, Columbia's overseas distribution ability was second only to the powerful Warner. In many countries, Columbia had set up branches dedicated to film distribution. After carefully reading the information in front of him, Michael Eisner said to himself, "Sure enough." The investigation report in his hand showed that after the dissolution of several Colombian distribution companies in South America, the employees were quickly absorbed by other film distribution companies. Although the names of these branches in South America were different, and no one would associate them with Firefly Pictures, Michael Eisner was sure that in a few years, these distribution companies would definitely change the logo of Firefly Pictures. Michael Eisner tapped the table gently as he pondered in silence. South America was only the beginning. Following that, it was either Southeast Asia or Europe. Firefly's distribution strength in European countries was still quite good. In addition, Europe was the second largest film market after North America. Peter Guber certainly did not dare to close down the distribution company in Europe. However, it was inevitable that some of the elites would be laid off. As for the countries in Southeast Asia, because they were close to Japan, Peter Guber might be placed at the end, and it would not cause too much of a stir. However, once Firefly completed this plan, the only shortcoming of Firefly in film distribution would be completely made up, and Firefly would no longer be restrained by the other major film companies. Understanding this, Michael Eisner then began to think about what he should do. In recent years, the overseas film market, like the North American film market, was in a period of rapid growth. It was precisely because of the expansion of the market that more and more big-budget films emerged in Hollywood. The overseas market has not reached a saturated state so far, so ignoring this matter will not have much impact on Universal. After all, in the overseas market, the interests of Hollywood film companies are the same. Firefly's excellent films get high box office overseas, and it can also stimulate the consumption of other Hollywood films in the overseas market. Michael Eisner was unwilling to completely ignore it. If this matter was exposed, it may cause a certain degree of interference with Firefly's plan. However, once Eric knew that he was behind this, Firefly would definitely target Universal again, just like Firefly targeted Disney 2 years ago. Michael Eisner even occasionally had a suspicion that the movie Throat Cutter Island might be a trap set by Eric. After thinking for a long time, Michael Eisner picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a number. The other side quickly picked up. "This is Michael Eisner." There was some noise outside the car window. Eric looked at his watch and couldn't help but frown. This was the 4th group of people he had encountered. Today is not Martin Luther King Day. Why are there so many black men outside with banners blocking the entire road in Burbank? Eric rolled down the car window and looked outside. He was about to ask the driver to get out of the car to find out what happened when his phone suddenly rang. Eric was not in a hurry to answer the phone. He asked the driver in the front row to go out and see what was going on. Then he picked up the phone. "Hello, this is Eric Williams." Hearing the voice of the person on the other side, Eric was a little surprised. "Mr. Eisner, what's the matter?" Michael Eisner leaned against the leather chair, stared at the information in his hand, and said, "Eric, have you heard about the recent large-scale layoffs in Colombia?" Eric raised his eyebrows slightly. Of course, Colombia has been losing money for the past 2 years. It's normal for them to make layoffs. If it were me, I would definitely do the same. "Mr. Eisner, why are you asking this?" Michael Eisner could not detect any guilt from Eric's tone. However, based on his understanding of Eric, he would not show any guilt in such a situation. "Eric, I don't think it's that simple, right?" Eric's tone was a little lazy. "Oh, Mr. Eisner, what do you think is going on? I heard that the employees who were laid off did not really lose their jobs. Not only that, but their salaries also increased by 20%. If Mr. Eisner says so, then it must be so," Eric replied unhurriedly. "However, this has nothing to do with us, right?" Michael Eisner was puzzled. "What? I mean, this has nothing to do with us," Eric repeated. "I think we should still care about our own affairs. I heard that Universal just reached a deal with Mr. Spielberg to film Schindler's Ark. To be honest, I'm also very optimistic about this book. Also, my relationship with Steven is not bad." Michael Eisner fell silent. Eric, who was blocked on a street in Burbank, continued, "Mr. Eisner, I also heard that Universal is planning to cooperate with Lucasfilm. However, you know that Firefly will be producing many blockbusters with special effects in the next few years. Although there is a competitive relationship between the digital domain and industrial light and magic, if we are willing to share some special effects technology, I believe that Lucasfilm will be very willing to take on Firefly's special effects movie project." Michael Eisner finally understood. Eric wanted him to shut up on this matter. Otherwise, he would also interfere with the cooperation between Universal, Spielberg, and George Lucas. Realizing this, Michael Eisner felt aggrieved. Even a year ago, there were not many people in Hollywood who dared to speak to him like this. However, he knew that Eric was fully capable of doing this now. This time, he seemed to have no choice but to compromise. "Eric, I think I'm not the only one who knows, right?" Michael Eisner said ambiguously. Eric's lips curled into a smile. Eisner's words were more or less a compromise. "We don't care about other people's affairs, but if someone's mouth is too big, I don't mind knocking out a few front teeth." Michael Eisner coughed a few times and spouted some nonsense before hanging up. Eric threw the phone aside and looked at the driver who had returned to the driver's seat. He asked, "What's going on outside? Have you asked clearly?" "Yes, Mr. Williams," the driver replied. "It's a very old case from last year. A black man named Rodney King was suspected of dangerous driving. When he was arrested by several police officers, he resisted and was beaten up." When Eric heard the name Rodney King, he frowned slightly. Although the information about this matter was not very detailed in his memory, he should not have remembered the name Rodney King wrongly. Thinking about the time, it was April 1992. The time was right. The driver continued. However, when the 4 white police officers were enforcing the law, a passerby happened to take a video with a handheld camera and sent it to CNN. In order to increase the popularity of the news, CNN cut out the part where Rodney King resisted, and only aired the part where he beat people up. After the incident blew up, although the full video was broadcast one after another on the 3 major TV stations in an attempt to calm the storm, it was no use. The lawsuit dragged on for a year, and today, the official verdict was announced. These black people expressed their solidarity with King. The driver wanted to continue, but Eric waved his hand and interrupted him. "Turn around. Let's go back." The driver showed a puzzled expression. Eric repeated, "I said turn around. Let's go back. Back to the Sharp Corner Manor." Although the driver was very puzzled, he heard Eric's unquestionable tone and quickly turned the car around. Eric leaned back in his seat and rubbed his temples. The 1992 Los Angeles riot. He did not expect to encounter it. Eric had very little information about the upcoming Los Angeles riot. He only knew that it was a racial riot that happened once in a century in the United States. On the way home, Eric kept making calls. The women called one by one. Virginia and Joanna were both in New York, so it was fine. Although there would be riots in other parts of North America after the Los Angeles riot, it would take a while for it to spread. Once the news spread, the other side would definitely be on guard. Jennifer Connelly was in Stan Blessing. She had never finished her studies as a girl. After following Eric, she was no longer anxious about her acting career. Instead, she was relieved and focused more on her studies. She planned to get her degree this year. Nicole was still training at the Secret Service Academy, so there was no problem. Famick Johnson was in his villa in Beverly Hills. He had just woken up and was a little excited when he heard Eric's voice. Eric asked a few questions tactfully. He knew that the girl would stay at home today, so he did not say much. If even Beverly Hills was not safe, then Los Angeles would be completely destroyed. Drew, Julia, and Elizabeth were still at home. They planned to go to the Digital Domain headquarters in Praia Vista to check on the progress of the production of Disguised Stranger. Eric thought for a while and asked the driver a few questions. He learned that Rodney King's case would not be heard until the afternoon, so he decided to change his route to Praia Vista. At the same time, he called Jeffrey and told him to go to Praia Vista to see the dinosaur model together. Finally, he quieted down. After thinking about it for a long time, Eric realized that he had informed everyone that he needed to. As for the others, he didn't care too much. He had always been a very indifferent person, and he didn't intend to be a saint. In the face of such a big event where his ability was completely ineffective, he couldn't do much. The car drove slowly on the road of Los Angeles. Eric suddenly thought of someone. Picking up his phone and thinking for a while, Eric finally could not help but make a call. A somewhat stubborn and sweet face appeared in his mind. "Hello, I'm Miss Jennifer Aniston's assistant. May I know who you are?" A female voice on the other side of the phone answered the call and asked politely, "I'm Eric Williams." "Ah." The person on the other side of the phone exclaimed softly and quickly quieted down. Mr. Williams, I'll go call Miss Jennifer Aniston now. She's putting on makeup." No need," Eric interrupted and asked. "Where are you now?" "Universal Studios." "Mr. Williams, are you coming?" Eric did not answer and continued to ask, "What's Jenny's schedule today?" "Miss Jennifer Aniston has been shooting a romantic comedy recently. Today it's all indoor scenes. She'll stay in the studio for the whole day." The unknown assistant quickly replied. Eric said faintly, "Oh, then I'm fine." "Ah, don't tell Jenny that I called." "Mr. Williams, I don't understand." Eric raised his voice and said, "You don't need to understand. I just need you to remember, don't tell Jenny that I called." "Oh, I understand, Mr. Williams," the assistant stuttered. Chapter 467. Firefly's studio base was bigger than the Universal Studios and Warner Studios in Burbank combined. The base was also neatly divided. When it was close to 10 o'clock, a Chevrolet SUV and a red BMW sedan drove into the base one after another. They stopped in the parking lot of the Digital Domain office. The doors of the two cars opened, and 5 women got out of the 2 cars. Even though they were used to seeing all kinds of beautiful women in the studio base, the appearance of the 5 women still attracted the attention of many passing employees. Julia didn't like the looks of the passers-by around her. She got into the SUV and looked around. She asked, "Liz, where are my sunglasses?" Elizabeth took out a pair of Ray-Ban glasses hanging in her pocket and put them on. She said, "How would I know? I clearly remember I put them." Julia raised her head in distress. She saw Elizabeth's sunglasses and was stunned for a moment. Then she pounced over. "Okay, give them back to me." Elizabeth dodged with a smile. "I'm not giving them back. Come and snatch them from me if you can." "How childish." Drew, who got out of the BMW behind, complained to Tina Fey and Claudia Schiff beside him. As soon as he finished, he saw Eric walk out of the Digital Domain office not far away. However, because the big Chevrolet SUV blocked their line of sight, Elizabeth and Julia, who were laughing and pestering each other, didn't see Eric's figure. Drew revealed a naughty smile. He reached out and poked the two women beside him. Then, he pointed at Julia and Elizabeth, who were fooling around not far away. "Hey, I'll let you guys watch a good show." Tina Fey pursed her lips and smiled. Claudia Schiff curiously asked, "What show?" "Just watch carefully." Drew pointed in the direction of the two women again. At this time, Eric was already on the other side of Elizabeth and Julia's SUV. Tina Fey and Claudia Schiffer stared in that direction. Eric turned around from the front of the SUV and appeared in front of Elizabeth and Julia, saying something. Then, they saw the two women, who were entangled together, quickly separate. Elizabeth was still fine as she greeted Eric, but Julia, who had been fooling around with Elizabeth just a moment ago, seemed to have shrunk. She looked like a little mouse under a cat's paw. "How was it? Was it fun?" Drew laughed heartlessly. Claudia Heaver held back her smile and asked in confusion, "Why does Julia seem so afraid of Williams?" Drew shrugged. She had only discovered this by chance. When she asked Eric for the reason, she only got a knock on the head. "It shouldn't be fear, but I'm not too sure what it is. If you want to know, you can ask Eric." Claudia rolled her eyes at Drew. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" Beside the SUV, Eric asked a few questions, grabbed Elizabeth, took off the sunglasses, and handed it to Julia. Only then did he wave over. "It's already 10 o'clock. Why are you only here now?" Eric asked casually after greeting them. He then led the girls to the studio in the digital domain. Drew ignored other people's gazes and hung on Eric's arm intimately. She said, "There was a traffic jam on the road. The streets are so lively today. Didn't you see?" Eric nodded and didn't say anything. The main office area for the digital domain's employees was 3 standard commercial lofts. They were divided into 2 floors. These tall factory-like buildings were 8 meters wide and over 30 meters long. Each building could accommodate up to 200 people working at the same time. Tina Fey followed Eric into these studios. She couldn't help but sigh softly as she looked at the exquisitely decorated open office area, and the digital domain's employees shuttling back and forth. Hearing Tina Fey's voice, Eric turned his head with a smile and asked, "Are you a little envious of their working environment?" Tina Fey nodded with a smile. In the newspaper she used to work at, more than 10 employees were squeezed into a small office. Many of her colleagues dreamed of having a spacious office one day. "If you want, you can experience it here for a period of time in the future," Eric said casually. Tina Fey shook her head again. She pointed at a special effects artist who was working hard on a computer in a cubicle on her left. "I don't know how to do this." "You can learn the Maya software used to develop special effects in the digital domain after a while. Also, don't you know how to draw? You have some foundation." As Eric was speaking, a slender hand reached over and pinched his arm gently. She whispered into his ear, "How did you know she knows how to draw?" Eric pushed Elizabeth's face away from his ear. "There are so many people watching. Mind your image." Elizabeth snorted softly. She pulled Julia 1 meter away from Eric to show her dissatisfaction. Eric did not mind. He said, "Jeffrey will be here later. Let's go take a look at the post-production of Disguised Stranger first." There were not many special effects scenes in Disguised Stranger. However, the style of the special effects was very cartoonish. To solve this problem, the digital domain borrowed 2 animators from Pixar to design the scenes together. After checking the progress of the special effects of Disguised Stranger, the women were very interested in the technology of combining special effects with real scenes. They all went over to the special effects artist and asked him all sorts of questions. Although Eric could not do it himself, he knew the principles of the technology like the back of his hand. He did not go over to watch the show. Instead, he walked to the staff cafe alone and ordered a cup of coffee. He took a movie magazine and started reading it. After Elizabeth finished watching the special effects artist demonstrate how to process a scene, she turned around and saw that Eric had disappeared. She followed him out and asked a few people. Then, she found Eric sitting alone in the cafe. Elizabeth ordered a cup of coffee from the waiter at the bar and walked over to Eric. She sat down across from Eric and stared at Eric with a smile that said, "I know what you did." Eric continued reading the magazine in front of him without looking up. After a while, he saw a request that he was interested in. He said, "Go get me a pen." Elizabeth was a little discouraged when she realized that her posture was useless. She stood up angrily and walked to the work area. She borrowed a pen and paper from a staff member and threw it in front of Eric. Eric picked up the pen and quickly took down notes. At the same time he said, "Look at your expectant face. If you have anything to say, just say it." "I found out about you in Colombia," Elizabeth said in a tone that said, "Hurry up and please me, or I will tell others." Eric took a long time to react and said, "Oh." Elizabeth resisted the urge to splash the coffee in her hand. "Aren't you nervous?" Eric finished copying the information in the magazine, folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. He then said, "Do you think you are the only smart person in Hollywood? Then aren't you even more worried that others will tell others?" "Of course not. I have already gotten all the distribution resources of Colombia in South America. Next is the most important one, Europe. Even if someone wants to create trouble, without any evidence, Sony will receive the information and conduct an investigation. By the time they figure out the truth, Firefly will have gotten a part of Colombia's distribution resources in Europe. As for the remaining distribution channels in Southeast Asia, they will get it. At that time, Sony will be very clear that this matter has become a fact. If they fall out with Sony, it will not be good for either side. Even if they go to court, they will not win. So they will have to swallow this loss." "I can't help but want to praise you," Elizabeth said teasingly. Eric said, "After all, the Japanese are just outsiders. If it is an American company, it will not be able to do this. Just wait and see. Sony and Panasonic, these two companies will not be in Hollywood for long. Even if they can barely adapt, they will not have much success. Because once they want to diversify like Warner, they will be restricted in various aspects. In the end, they can only hold on to the less profitable business of film production." "News Corporation is also an outsider," Elizabeth retorted somewhat proudly. Eric glanced at the girl and said, "How many times has your old man changed his nationality?" Elizabeth suddenly choked, as if she had swallowed a big cooked duck egg. Jeffrey soon arrived at Praia Vista by car. Eric brought the girls and Jeffrey to the studio that designed the dinosaur models. The team here was led by Stan Winston. Among the dinosaur models, the most important was of course the Tyrannosaurus Rex and the sick Triceratops. "Wow, come and take a look. This eye looks like a real one." Drew walked around the studio excitedly, and was soon attracted by a mechanical eye the size of an orange. Under the control of the modeler, the mechanical eye could not only blink, but also expand and contract freely. It was exquisite. "These are just small things. Miss Barrymore, come with me. Let's go take a look at the big guy." Stan Winston smiled proudly. The group walked into a large warehouse. A Tyrannosaurus Rex model that had already begun to take shape appeared in front of them. 5 or 6 modelers were busy setting up the scaffolding. "This Tyrannosaurus Rex is 13 meters long and 5 meters tall. We plan to use 40 hydraulic transmission devices to control it." Stan Winston stood beside Eric and explained excitedly. Although he was the best model special effects artist, it was his first time creating such a huge monster. Even the alien queen from a few years ago was not as shocking as this Tyrannosaurus Rex. After all, the alien queen was a fictional creature, but the Tyrannosaurus Rex had really existed in Earth's history. Eric looked at the white Tyrannosaurus Rex that had not yet been colored and asked, "Can it be completed before June?" Stan Winston knew that Eric planned to start production at the end of June. He nodded and said, "No problem." "What about the CG special effects?" "This is more complicated," Stan Winston said. "If we create a model out of thin air, in order to achieve a more realistic effect, we need to do a lot of calculations and rendering tests on the material of the dinosaur's skin. It's expensive and a waste of time. Therefore, they recently came up with an idea. They plan to use a laser scanner to scan the body of the dinosaur into the computer after the model is completed. This will reduce a lot of work." Eric was satisfied. "That's a good idea. You don't have to worry about the funding. As long as it's necessary, Firefly will definitely support you." It was soon noon. After having lunch in the base's cafeteria, Eric and Stan Winston discussed the design details of the dinosaur model for the entire afternoon. After an unknown amount of time, Eric and Stan Winston were standing under the Tyrannosaurus Rex model. They were talking about something to a design blueprint in Stan Winston's hand. A group of girls who had been in the base for the entire afternoon appeared in front of him again. When Stan Winston saw that Eric was surrounded by a group of girls, he shrugged and walked over to Jeffrey. "Eric, it's already past 4. We have to go home." He didn't expect a day to pass so quickly. Just as Eric was about to speak, he suddenly remembered the reason he was here today. He raised his wrist and looked at his watch. It was already 4:50. Rodney King's case should have been decided by now, but he didn't hear any news of a riot. From Praia Vista to Beverly Hills, they would definitely have to pass through downtown Los Angeles. The girls in front of him were all beautiful girls. If they were surrounded by thugs, the result would be, Eric couldn't help but shudder. Looking at the beautiful faces in front of him, he said, "Don't go back tonight. Come to my place together later." Hearing this, the 5 women instantly looked at each other. Drew had an indifferent expression, and even seemed a little excited. Julia shrunk her neck, and Elizabeth glared at him with dissatisfaction, thinking that he was becoming more and more of a bastard. Tina Fey and Claudia Schiffer's faces were a little flushed. Emma is still at home," Julia said weakly. "Isn't there a nanny looking after her? It's fine." Elizabeth couldn't stand it anymore and pulled Julia. "We're not going to play with you. I'm going back with Julia." Eric also knew that the girls were a little perverted. However, no matter what, he couldn't let them go at this time. Seeing that Elizabeth was about to leave, Eric reached out and pulled Julia over. "If you want to go, you can go. Julia stays here." "You? How can you do this?" Elizabeth stomped her feet, but didn't move anymore. "Then that's it. I'll call the Manor's helicopter to pick us up." Eric didn't look at Elizabeth's face anymore. He took out his phone and dialed the number. Chapter 468. Not long after Eric ended the call, Stan Winston hurried in. "Eric, something's happened outside." Eric thought to himself, "It's finally here." He said to the women, "Stay here obediently. Don't run around." After saying that, Eric followed Stan Winston and left the studio quickly. The women looked at each other for a moment. Drew was the first to react. Without thinking, she hurriedly followed them out. Eric told us to wait here." Before Julia could finish her sentence, the other 3 women also followed without hesitation. Obviously, they didn't intend to listen to Eric, and no one paid attention to Julia. It was almost time to get off work, but the entire park was no longer as orderly as before. It was a mess. A large number of employees gathered in the outdoor area in groups of 3 to 5, whispering to each other while looking at the eastern sky. Not far away, there were some people standing on the rooftop of the 3-story administrative building. They seemed to be looking into the distance. There was no need to go to a high place. Standing in the wide square outside the office area, one could see faint black smoke rising from the east of the park. Although there was no internet, such a big incident in downtown Los Angeles still spread throughout the greater Los Angeles area in a very short period of time. At 3:00 in the afternoon, the San Fernando City Court in Los Angeles officially announced that the police officers involved in the Rodney King case were acquitted and released on the spot. After the strong protests of the black community were ignored, they became more and more agitated. In the end, they began to attack the white residents passing by, and it quickly turned into a riot. Eric originally had the attitude that he didn't care as long as the people around him were fine. However, when he saw hundreds of employees from the digital domain and the filming base gathered in the park, Eric realized that he couldn't just leave without a care. Praia Vista was a district of Culver City. Compared to other districts in Los Angeles, the economy of this district was relatively backward. There were also a large number of black people living nearby, which meant that there was a strong element of instability. Through the loudspeakers in the park, Eric managed to unify the chaotic crowd and calm them down. Only then was he able to discuss countermeasures with the management of the base. Right now, things are mainly happening in the south, which is very close to us. Just now, someone tried to break into the park. I've already asked the security guard to close the gate, but the park is too big. It's hard to guarantee that no one will crawl in from somewhere. No one can guarantee this kind of thing, so we can only seal off the photography studio, post-production studio, and other areas. This way, even if someone sneaks in during the chaos, it's unlikely that they can break into these buildings. After all, we still have some security guards in the park. A manager in charge of the logistics of the park pointed to the map of Los Angeles on the table and said. Eric interrupted the park manager. Let's not worry about that for now. Let's discuss how to get these hundreds of people to leave safely. Anyway, we have the insurance company. Even if something happens to the equipment in the park, we can get the insurance company to pay for it. However, there are hundreds of people in the park now. It's not easy. No matter what, the most important thing is to ensure that our employees are safe. After hearing what Eric said, everyone started to voice their opinions. I just called the Culver City police chief. He said that the rioters are mainly robbing stores and supermarkets now. Often, only lone white people are attacked. So, it's safest to let everyone leave together, especially the female employees. They must be escorted. They must not leave alone, even if they live in an area with good security. After all, no one can guarantee that there won't be any accidents along the way. I think we should try to avoid the city as much as possible. Go north to Santa Monica, then pass through Beverly Hills. It's definitely safer there. Another person pointed to the map on the table and drew a detour route with his finger. The areas he mentioned were also the areas with the best security in the greater Los Angeles area. If it's the employees who live in the city center, they should stay here tonight. Anyway, we have staff dormitories here. Also, I think it's best for the female employees who live in the city center not to leave today. That's the most chaotic place. It's safer to stay in the studio than to go back. Maybe we can ask the Culver City Police Station for some manpower support. Firefly Cineplex was built here at the invitation of the Culver City government. I don't think they'll just ignore it. If they can send people over, with the help of our own people here, this place will be safer. Eric kept nodding as he listened. When everyone was done, he said, "That's all. Also, inform everyone that it's a holiday from tomorrow onwards. Wait for further notice when to come back to work." An executive hesitantly suggested, "Mr. Williams, I don't think it's necessary to take a holiday. Maybe tomorrow will be fine. Many projects are very tight." "Do as I say." Eric waved his hand, too lazy to explain too much. As the situation escalated, it was inevitable that a large number of companies would stop working. It was better to inform them collectively now than to inform them one by one through the phone later. Seeing that Eric had made up his mind, the executives had to accept the decision and quickly dispersed to arrange their own matters. After they left, a few women came over. They already knew what had happened. "Eric, you didn't have a premonition that something was going to happen, did you?" Elizabeth couldn't help but ask, her eyes shining. Eric rolled up a map in front of him and placed it on top of the filing cabinet. He said, "I'm not God. How would I know?" Elizabeth obviously didn't believe Eric's words. She snorted and made a sound of doubt. Eric turned his head and patted the dust off his hands before saying, "Where is your old man now? Can't you use a nicer name?" Elizabeth complained discontentedly before saying, "He's in New York, right? What's wrong?" Eric pointed to the black smoke that could be vaguely seen outside the window. "This is a good opportunity for Fox News Channel. If we seize it, Fox News Channel can avoid detours for several years." In the original spacetime, Fox News Channel seized the opportunity of the September 11th incident in 2001 and rose rapidly to become the second largest news channel in North America, side by side with CNN. Elizabeth thought for a moment, then picked up the phone and dialed Murdoch's number. Eric stayed in Praia Vista until 7 in the evening. It wasn't until the Culver City Police Department, under Eric's insistence, sent 10 fully armed police officers to Firefly Cineplex to cooperate with the security of the park that Eric took the women back to Point Manor by helicopter. He originally wanted to bring Jeffrey along, But when Jeffrey saw the group of women around Eric, he immediately shook his head. In the end, the matter was resolved when Stan Winston invited Jeffrey to his place in Malibu. After such a big incident, although there were 5 more women in Point Manor, there wasn't much of a different atmosphere. Everyone was gathered in front of the TV, watching Fox's live broadcast of what happened in Los Angeles. As a media mogul, Murdoch was much more sensitive to such a big incident than ordinary people. After receiving Elizabeth's call, Murdoch quickly made arrangements. 2 Fox News Channel's interview helicopters soon hovered over the city where the incident happened, and several teams of reporters on the ground were also sent out. On the TV screen, the originally brightly lit downtown area, which could be seen from Beverly Hills, was now in chaos. There were sirens and fires everywhere. The chaos spread from parts of the southern part of Los Angeles to the whole of Los Angeles in just a few hours. Eric basically spent the whole night on the phone. First, he had to make sure that the employees of Digital Domain and the film studio had returned home safely. At around 9 in the evening, another group of thugs tried to climb over the wall and break into the studio, but they were dispersed by the police stationed at the studio. At the same time, there were also a lot of calls asking if they were safe. It wasn't until after 11 in the morning that the phone stopped ringing. Eric looked at the TV. Fox News Channel was still doing a special report on the incident. It seemed that after this incident, Fox News Channel would definitely be able to gain a foothold. Eric didn't feel much about this kind of thing that was similar to rising in a disaster. This was a capitalistic society, and Murdoch was a very typical capitalist. It was their instinct to turn all available opportunities into capital. It's too late. Go to sleep. If it really doesn't work out, we'll leave Los Angeles tomorrow, Eric said as he looked at his watch. Although Malibu was still very peaceful, no one could be sure what would happen. In addition, Eric didn't have any memories of the incident, so he could only plan for the best. When the worried women heard this, their expressions suddenly became strange. Eric, of course, knew what these women were thinking. He shrugged helplessly. I'm going to sleep first. Whoever wants to freeload can come over. If you don't want to, go find your own room. After saying that, he slowly got up and left amidst the women's soft whispers. Drew looked at Eric's back as he left. She wanted to stand up a few times, but in the end, she sat down. Elizabeth picked up an apple from the fruit plate in front of her, and took a few bites. She said, "If you want to go, then go. Who can stop you?" "I'm going to my own bedroom." Drew snorted softly and stood up a little proudly. Among all of Eric's women, only Drew had a fixed bedroom in the villa. Julia called Beverly Hills and made sure that the little guy over there was asleep. She also stood up and stretched before walking out of the living room. Elizabeth glanced at Tina Fey and Claudia Schiffer, said goodnight, and got up to follow them out. Tina Fey and Claudia Schiffer looked at each other awkwardly. They didn't treat themselves as outsiders like the other 3 women. Eric and Drew didn't arrange a bedroom for them. The 2 women didn't even know which room to go to. The 2 women stared at the TV screen blankly until midnight. Claudia thought for a while and said, "Why don't we go to sleep too?" "Okay." Tina Fey nodded but didn't move from her seat. Claudia had to stand up first and turn off the TV. Tina Fey then followed Claudia to the second floor. "I remember that I stayed in this room last time." Claudia pointed at a guest room on the second floor and said softly with a slightly red face. She couldn't help but think of the scene where she was tricked by Drew last time. Tina Fey also lowered her voice slightly. "Then can I sleep with you?" Claudia nodded. She knew that Tina Fey's situation was similar to hers. If she hadn't stayed here for a night, Claudia wouldn't know which room was the guest room. Thinking of this, Claudia grabbed the door handle and twisted it, only to find that the door was locked from the inside. Moreover, there was laughter coming from the room. At the same time, Elizabeth's voice sounded. "You bastard, go wherever you want. Don't disturb us." The 2 women instantly understood that this guest room was already occupied by Elizabeth and Julia. Moreover, they thought that they were some elegant thief on the night shift. After looking at each other for a moment, Claudia pointed at the end of the corridor where Eric's master bedroom was. "Why don't we go ask Mr. Williams?" For some reason, Claudia didn't mention asking Drew. Perhaps she felt that Eric was the owner of this villa. Tina Fey didn't seem to think too much about it. She hummed softly, and the two women walked towards Eric's bedroom together. When Eric woke up the next morning, he couldn't help but find it funny when he recalled last night. When he opened the door in the middle of the night and heard the two women asking in a timid tone, Eric stared at the two women's faces and closed the bedroom door with a bang, directly trapping the two little lambs that came to him. After putting on his clothes and getting up, Eric looked at the women who were pretending to be asleep and said, "It's still early now. You can sleep a little longer." Seeing that Eric closed the door, Claudia then said to Tina Fey, "All right, he knows that you're awake." Tina Fey couldn't pretend anymore. She pulled a pillow to cover her face and said in a muffled voice, oh my God, what have I done? Oh my God." Seeing Tina Fey's big reaction, Claudia, who was originally a little depressed, relaxed a little. Although she was born in a good family and didn't have to walk the path of many supermodels who relied on their bodies to fight for their positions, Claudia had seen all kinds of strange things in the circle during her few years as a model. Compared to Tina Fey, who was born in a conservative middle-class family, Claudia was obviously more open-minded. Seeing that Tina Fey was still using a pillow to cover her head after a while, Claudia couldn't help but laugh. "You didn't object last night, did you?" Tina Fey recalled the situation last night and felt even more depressed. "I think I should have. Oh my, he didn't even give me a chance to speak. No wonder Miss Murdoch said that he's a bastard." Chapter 469. On the second day of the Los Angeles riot, although Claudia Schiffer and Tina Fey came out of Eric's bedroom one after another early in the morning, none of the women left as the incident was still fermenting in the city. Of course, Eric was bound to have a crusade against them. But they were basically ignored by Eric. After all, they couldn't poke a hole in his body. In the morning, the Manor's helicopter returned to Beverly Hills and picked up a certain little one. With Emma, who was running around the villa like a little mouse, as a buffer, the atmosphere in the villa also became gentle. In order to protect their privacy, Julia didn't bring the nanny along. Perhaps she wanted to show her maternal side in front of Eric. The 5 women took the initiative to take care of the little one, but it was obvious that none of them were good at taking care of children. Take Julia for example. Thinking about Emma Roberts, who had the same personality as Fei Fei in the original Spacetime, it was obvious what Julia's education level was. Although he had already planned to leave Los Angeles, the incident lasted for 3 days and didn't affect Malibu. Eric also gave up on the idea. Since he had nothing to do in the villa, he began to discuss the preparation of the 3 companies with Chris on the phone all day long. When the incident happened, Chris was recruiting staff for the 3 companies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In the early 90s, the 2 most advanced universities in the United States in computer technology, one was Stanford University. The founders of famous internet companies such as Yahoo and Google came from Stanford University. The other one was Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The famous father of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, was a professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Chris told Eric that he had contacted Tim Berners-Lee himself. Tim Berners-Lee was the person who proposed and promoted the concept of the World Wide Web. The so-called World Wide Web was the predecessor of the International Internet. Later on, the websites that started with www on the Internet were all members of the World Wide Web Alliance. Chris said on the phone that Tim Berners-Lee was very interested in the graphical interface browser, but at the same time, Tim Berners-Lee was also full of concerns about this project. As early as a few years ago, Tim Berners-Lee and others developed a non-graphical interface web browser software. However, when he realized that once the web browser was used for commercial operations, it was likely to cause the internet to be torn apart due to software standards and other issues, so he finally gave up the idea. Eric soon realized the importance of Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee was the chairman of the World Wide Web Alliance, and he had the power to set many technical standards for the early stages of the internet. If he could get on good terms with this person, or even go one step further and pull this person under his wing, then it would be like adding wings to a tiger in the high-tech internet industry. Through Chris's introduction, Eric contacted Tim Berners-Lee himself through the phone. In the face of an MIT professor, Eric's poor computer knowledge was completely useless. Fortunately, he could see the future and knew the development trend of the internet industry like the back of his hand. Therefore, the two chatted very happily on the phone. Tim Berners-Lee praised Eric's many ideas about the development of the internet. The two chatted for more than an hour. In the end, Eric took the opportunity to invite Tim Berners-Lee to Los Angeles as a guest. At the same time, he wanted to discuss his thoughts on the Internet Explorer, i.e. company, in more detail. Eric didn't expect Tim Berners-Lee to be more straightforward than him. He directly agreed to come to Los Angeles this weekend. After all, Los Angeles was still in a riot. Since Tim Berners-Lee was so eager, Eric certainly wouldn't object. He even specially sent a private jet of Firefly Pictures to Massachusetts to pick him up. The Los Angeles incident was still ongoing. It was the election year of the United States. Eric estimated that George H.W. Bush must be the most upset. Because of the victory of the Gulf War, George H.W. Bush's voter support was much higher than his opponents, and he had a great chance of being re-elected. However, everyone knew that no matter what the outcome of the Los Angeles riot was, it was bound to affect George H.W. Bush's public support. Eric couldn't help but think that Bill Clinton's narrow victory in the United States election in the original spacetime might have something to do with this very timely riot. On the third day of the Los Angeles riot, sporadic riots occurred in major cities on the east and west coasts of the United States. Racial issues had always been the last thing that the United States rulers wanted to face. Therefore, George H.W. Bush could only say something like, "intolerable" in a televised speech. He didn't mention racial conflicts at all. At the same time, it wasn't until the third day of the incident that a large number of people in Los Angeles took the initiative to take to the streets and asked the federal government to quell the riot as soon as possible. California Governor Peter Wilson also asked the federal government for help in the name of California. George H.W. Bush then ordered a large number of National Guards and Marines to go to Los Angeles. Although the federal government didn't send troops to quell the riot until the third day, and was attacked by a large number of media outlets, many people knew that President Bush had no choice but to do so. At the beginning of the incident, public opinion was boiling. Because of the misdirection of the incomplete videotape, 90% of the citizens believed that the 4 police officers who assaulted Rodney King were guilty. Sending troops to quell the riot at this time was tantamount to adding fuel to the fire. Only after a few days of chaos, when the people themselves realized that doing so would only harm their own interests, could the riot be stopped. When a large number of National Guards were on the streets to arrest people, Tim Berners-Lee also came to Los Angeles. In order not to leave the impression of a playboy on the MIT professor, although that was the truth, Eric sent a few women out at the last minute, leaving only Julia. As for the reason, it was because a certain little girl seemed to have fallen in love with the Point Manor. When she left, she cried loudly and refused to get into the car. When a helicopter landed on the helipad of the Point Manor, Eric was still holding the tearful little Emma in his arms. A middle-aged man in his 30s with messy hair and sunken eyes got off the helicopter and walked towards Eric with a smile. Behind him was Chris, who was curious when he saw the little girl in Eric's arms. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Lee. The little girl cried just now and I just coaxed her." Eric held little Emma in one hand and shook hands with Tim Berners-Lee with the other. "Of course it's okay," Tim Berners-Lee said with a smile. "Eric, I didn't expect you to have a child." "No, this isn't my child actually." Eric pointed to Julia, who was next to him. Just as he was speaking, little Emma, who was sucking her fingers, called out, "Daddy." Although this tender voice was still a little muffled, everyone present could clearly hear what the little one was shouting. Eric's face darkened, and he wanted to explain, but little Emma quickly extended her little hand to Julia and added, "Mommy. It must be Drew. It must be this little girl who did something bad." Eric clearly remembered that this little girl had been secretly teaching the little girl to say something with a photo frame. He didn't expect it to be this. Although it was already the 1990s, Westerners still generally felt that having an illegitimate child was a very shameful thing. Many people such as Steve Jobs, were unwilling to admit that they had an illegitimate child, so the situation was a little awkward. Eric felt a sense of helplessness deep in his heart. He passed it to Julia, who was covering her mouth and snickering. Looking at Tim Berners-Lee, who had some contempt in his eyes, Eric knew that he must have thought that he was a guy who didn't want to take responsibility. He helplessly spread out his hands and said, "Okay, I'm her father." "What's going on?" Chris walked over at this time. Julia shook Emma in her arms and saw the expressions of Tim Berners-Lee and Chris. She then took the initiative to explain for Eric, "Mr. Lee, she's actually my brother's daughter. After his girlfriend gave birth to the child, neither of them were willing to raise her, so I adopted her." Chris also said, "Oh, I remember, this matter was in the newspaper last year. Your brother's name is Eric Roberts, right?" Julia nodded. Of course, it was impossible for Tim Berners-Lee not to know Julia. After hearing Julia and Chris' explanation, he also realized that he had misunderstood Eric. "Then don't stand here, let's go in." Eric made an inviting gesture while thinking about how to deal with the little girl who was causing trouble. It was already noon. After lunch, Eric brought Chris and Tim Berners-Lee to the glass wall of Linhai to talk about the graphical interface browser. Although Eric gave 3 plans, Chris only described the browser project to Tim Berners-Lee in detail. Although he was slightly shocked by the endless blue sky and blue sea outside the glass wall, Tim Berners-Lee quickly regained his composure and talked about the browser. "Eric, what I'm worried about is that once the graphical interface browser is commercially operated and achieves good results, it will definitely attract other software manufacturers to join the competition. Every manufacturer will set its own network protocol rules for its browser, and the website will definitely not be able to adapt to all browsers. This will cause the internet to be divided. The reason why I didn't commercialize the browser software we designed a few years ago was because I considered this. I hope to build a global information exchange network, not a scene where the internet is torn apart because of different network protocols." Eric listened carefully to Tim Berners-Lee's words, but in his heart, he felt that Tim Berners-Lee was too idealistic. In this capitalistic society, if there was a 100% profit, capital could commit any crime. In the future, the output of the internet would reach trillions of dollars. Such a fat piece of meat could not be controlled by idealism. Although Tim Berners-Lee had been dedicated to the free promotion of the World Wide Web, there was still a browser war between Netscape and Internet Explorer in the mid-1990s. Although Netscape was eventually eliminated, Google Chrome and Firefox appeared. Although everyone began to implement the free strategy later, Internet Explorer was never able to dominate the world. When Tim Berners-Lee finished speaking, Eric asked, "Mr. Lee, after saying so much, you actually want the graphical interface browser we developed to be free to users, right?" "Yes, if the graphical interface browser can be free to users, it will definitely greatly increase the speed of promotion of the World Wide Web." Tim Berners-Lee raised his hand and said, "Look, Eric, you're already so rich, why don't you do something more meaningful?" Eric smiled, picked up the coffee pot on the table, and poured some more coffee for Tim Berners-Lee. He said, "Mr. Lee, I'm a movie maker, so let's use movies as an example." After Edison invented the camera, the first black and white silent movie, Factory Gate, appeared in 1895. It was a short film played at the speed of 16 frames per second. Because the technology was very crude, the people in the picture looked like marionettes. Tim Berners-Lee wondered, "Eric, I don't quite understand. Does this have anything to do with what we're discussing?" Eric made a gesture to calm him down and said, "After a few more years, long silent movies appeared and quickly became an industry. In the 1920s, there were sound movies. In the 1940s, there were color movies. In the 60s, there were 3D movies. In the 80s, there were home videos. As we all know, the more convenient DVD technology has also been developed. What do you think is the factor driving all this?" Tim Berners-Lee was not an old-fashioned bookworm. Of course, he could understand the meaning of Eric's words. Eric smiled and continued, "It's interests. Because of the drive of interests, the film technology has been reformed and developed again and again. Without the drive of interests, What we are seeing now is likely to be the silent black and white pictures played at 16 frames per second like puppets in 1895. Eric, I don't refuse the company to make profits. I just hope that we can reduce some of our differences and build a unified information exchange network platform that can coexist with each other. Eric nodded and said, Mr. Lee, in fact, I have the same goal as you. I also hope to have a unified network platform. It's just that the way we achieve the goal is somewhat different. You want to share it freely, but I want to monopolize it. Tim Berners-Lee smiled and said, Eric, I'm a little surprised by your honesty. Chapter 470. Successful people often had a stubborn side. Tim Berners-Lee was not only the person who proposed the concept of the World Wide Web, but also the inventor of the world's first website server. If such a person was willing to set up a company and commercialize his research results, he would have become a billionaire long ago. However, as an idealist, Tim Berners-Lee gave up the wealth at his fingertips and instead chose to publicize his research results to the outside world for free. Such a person was definitely worthy of respect. Eric and Tim Berners-Lee chatted for a whole day. Although the conversation was very pleasant, and they admired each other very much, Tim Berners-Lee was still unwilling to give up his insistence on free sharing. It wasn't that Eric couldn't completely abandon Tim Berners-Lee and set up an IE company and develop a graphical interface browser according to his own ideas, but in that case, he would lose the opportunity to directly participate in the development of the Internet Protocol. In the evening, the two people sitting opposite each other were quiet. Chris, who was next to him, also silently looked at the sunset on the sea. Tim Berners-Lee picked up his coffee cup again, crossed his legs, and followed Chris to look at the burning sunset outside the glass curtain wall. He knew that Eric was about to make the final decision. After a long time, Eric said, Mr. Lee, I can agree to the IE browser being free. Tim Berners-Lee smiled, and Chris looked at Eric in surprise. Among the three projects, Chris had always felt that IE had the most commercial potential. If Eric chose to make this project free, the loss would not be small, but Chris did not raise any objections on the spot. The free strategy was almost an inevitable trend in software development. Although Eric did not know much about the browser software industry, he also knew that software sales were often the most insignificant part of the income of many internet companies. The most important thing was users. As long as a large enough number of users were accumulated, the value-added services on their own platforms would be the most profitable part of the internet company's profits. However, I have a few conditions, Eric continued. Tim Berners-Lee gestured for him to speak. Eric said, First of all, Mr. Lee, I hope that you can be a senior technical consultant of IE. I can promise you that. Tim Berners-Lee nodded without hesitation. Eric continued, The second condition is that when the World Wide Web Alliance formulates the Internet Protocol, it must lean towards the Internet Explorer's technical standards to a certain extent. In return, IE can donate a sum of research and development funds to the World Wide Web Foundation every year. At the same time, even though IE is free to the public, we still have the right to apply for patents. Tim Berners-Lee had given up the patent application for the website server and the World Wide Web technology. At the same time, he had also given up the opportunity to become a billionaire. However, Eric did not have the awareness to be such a philanthropist. His philosophy was that the software he developed with his own funds could be used by others for free, but what was his was still his. Others could use it, but they could not take it for themselves. Tim Berners-Lee knew that Eric still didn't give up the idea of monopolizing the market. However, this seemed to be the best solution. He didn't want to commercialize his own technological achievements, but he couldn't ask others to do so based on his own standards. Eric, as far as I'm concerned, I can agree to your second condition, but I still need to discuss this matter with the other members. Of course, Eric nodded. He knew that Tim Berners-Lee had a high prestige in the World Wide Web Alliance. Since he had personally agreed to these conditions, there wouldn't be many accidents. Tim Berners-Lee returned to MIT the next day. Although the Los Angeles riots were still ongoing, the situation had stabilized. After a new week, People went back to work, and Eric continued to be busy with the preparations for Jurassic Park. The most important dinosaur models needed for the movie had all been determined, and the CG special effects artists in the digital field had begun to develop the dinosaur special effects technology. As the producer of Jurassic Park, Jerry Bruckheimer had also been contacting the shooting location of Jurassic Park during this period of time. The main shooting location, Kauai, had been determined. During the Los Angeles riots, Jerry Bruckheimer had been looking for the amber mine scene in several Central American islands. Eric was involved in the most important casting work of the movie. Perhaps because the memory in his mind was too clear, Eric didn't like any of the materials submitted for the audition. In the end, he asked someone to contact Sam Neill. Sam Neill had joined the film and television industry in the 1970s. Although his acting skills were good, he hadn't been popular. Except for the occasional supporting role in some mainstream commercial films, he had been in the circle of small independent films for the rest of his time. After receiving Firefly's invitation for Jurassic Park, Sam Neill was of course overjoyed. Without seeing the script at all, he personally called and agreed to the matter. But then another problem appeared. Before receiving the invitation for Jurassic Park, Sam Neill had signed on as the second male lead in a sci-fi film, The Invisible Man Who Walked Through the Wall. The film was said to have an investment of $40 million, but Eric didn't have any impression of it. It must have been a flop. Although The Invisible Man Who Walked Through the Wall was barely a big production, the second male lead in this movie couldn't be compared to the first male lead in Jurassic Park. Sam Neill immediately chose to terminate the contract with Warner. It was very common for actors to change roles in a film, even during the filming process. But after learning the reason for Sam Neill's termination, the shrewd Warner was unwilling to do so. There had always been controversy within Warner about the Invisible Man Who Walked Through the Wall project. Therefore, although the film's investment was as high as $40 million, the cast was very simple. Among all the actors, only Daryl Hannah, who had acted in famous films such as Wall Street, Steel Magnolias and Blade Runner, was somewhat famous. The male lead, Chevy Chase, was a middle-aged actor about the same age as Sam Neill. At the same time, he was in the same situation as Sam Neill. Warner realized that this was a very good opportunity. After all, Eric's movies often made some of the less famous actors become famous overnight. Therefore, Warner directly raised the price by using the actor's contract in their hands as an excuse. They proposed that if Eric wanted Sam Neill, he would have to be the executive producer of The Invisible Man Who Walked Through the Wall. Eric's movies as a producer had never failed. Warner obviously wanted to use Eric's personal box office appeal. Not only that, Warner also promoted Sam Neill to the role of the male lead. When it came to the actor's contract, if one didn't take it seriously, the contract would be terminated and everyone would part on good terms. After all, a movie's investment was easily tens of millions. No one had the time to wrangle with each other. However, if one took it seriously, it would be a lot more troublesome. It was not unheard of to fight a lawsuit for a few years. Of course, Eric couldn't be the executive producer of a movie that he had never heard of. After reading the script from Warner, he was even more reluctant. Apart from the gimmick of the Invisible Man, there wasn't much new in the script. The plot was also a little scattered. However, Warner had already invested a lot of money in the early stages of the project. They had spent millions of dollars. It was impossible to cancel the movie project. He could only grit his teeth and bear with it. After a week of negotiations, the two sides finally reached an agreement. Eric would be the executive producer of another Warner movie, and Sam Neill would be the male lead of The Invisible Man Who Walked Through the Wall. After the shooting of Jurassic Park was completed, they would continue to shoot this movie. After some deliberation, Eric finally chose a movie that Warner was shooting. The male lead happened to be Kevin Costner, who won the Best Director and Best Actor award for Dances with Wolves this year. The movie was called Bodyguard. The executive producer's power was very broad. He could be in charge of everything, or he could not be in charge of anything. The most famous executive producer in Hollywood was Spielberg. On average, Spielberg would be the executive producer of at least 5 movies every year. While arguing with Warner about Sam Neill's contract, Eric was also busy with the female lead and other supporting roles. Eric chose a little boy from Spielberg's Captain Hawk. The other little girl was recommended by Jerry Bruckheimer. Eric readily gave Jerry Bruckheimer face. However, Eric did not tell Jerry that the little girl would become the most unpopular character in Jurassic Park. Eric remembered that in the original space-time, Jurassic Park was popular all over the world. However, John Hardman's granddaughter became the most hated character in Jurassic Park because of her stupid behavior. Therefore, the production company simply canceled the production of the little girl's real-life figurine. During the audition process for the female lead, Nicole, who was nervously filming Mr. and Mrs. Smith, brought Parker Kingsley to Eric and recommended an actress that Parker Kingsley had recently signed. After Parker Kingsley terminated her contract with Tom Cruise, she quickly signed a few actors with good potential. Originally, Parker Kingsley planned to get the male lead role in Jurassic Park after Nicole's reminder. The information had already been handed to Eric, but Eric already had the best candidate in mind. Parker Kingsley could only settle for the second best and set her sights on the female lead. Coincidentally, when Eric saw the actress recommended by Parker Kingsley, he was very surprised. The actress was about 27 or 28 years old. She was tall and had small eyes, but her smile made people feel comfortable. Most importantly, this actress named Helen Hunt happened to be the female lead of Tornado in the original Space-Time. From Parker Kingsley, Eric knew that Helen Hunt's career in the film industry had not improved. She originally planned to act in a TV series, but under Parker Kingsley's persuasion, she quickly decided to give it a shot and signed her contract with Parker Kingsley. She also actively fought for the opportunity to be the female lead in Jurassic Park. Although Eric understood Nicole's intentions, he did not care. In the past few years, Eric had deeply understood that Hollywood was actually a small circle of people. Although the standard audition process had been carried out, more often than not, actors and directors or producers would chat casually and have a few meals, and the role would be decided. Therefore, Eric did not object to Nicole's small circle of people. Moreover, Helen Hunt had won the Oscar for Best Actress in As Perfect as Kent in the original Space-Time, which meant that this woman's acting was definitely not a problem. After the audition, Eric was even more satisfied, so he quickly signed the contract with her. The days of May passed, and the 1992 summer holiday was coming. The aftermath of the Los Angeles riots gradually dissipated. Although during the riots, some incidents of black people saving white people were greatly exaggerated by the media, which played a role in mitigating the racial conflict, in fact, many things had not changed. Not only that, but because of the impact of the riots, discrimination was even more intense. In Los Angeles, there were many cases of property owners firing black employees because they felt that black employees were a very unstable factor. In addition, Los Angeles County also announced to the public that the case of Rodney King would be reopened. Eric knew that this case would only have one result, and that was guilty. Moreover, the fuse of the riots, a parolee Mr. Rodney King, who was in prison for robbery and drunkenness, timely sued Los Angeles County, seeking a huge amount of personal compensation. According to the information released by the media, Mr. Rodney King asked Los Angeles County for a compensation of $54 million at the price of $1 million per stick. In the so-called violent video, Rodney King was beaten a total of 54 times. After reading the news, Eric could only sneer. It was destined that nothing would change. Although Los Angeles County could not pay the huge compensation of $54 million, the final compensation would definitely be in the millions, and the money would come from the taxpayers. However, this time, Eric thought that the taxpayers who had been devastated by the riots would definitely not complain about the injustice. Chapter 471. Perhaps to drive away the shock caused by the Los Angeles riots, when the crime action movie Lethal Weapon 3 was released on May 15, people flocked to the cinema. The third installment of Warner's classic series earned more than $40 million at the box office in the first week, which was a good start for the 1992 summer season. It also made many Hollywood studios, who were worried about the impact of the Los Angeles riots on the summer box office, breathe a sigh of relief. On May 22nd, the third installment of another classic series was released. However, Alien 3 did not have such a good fate. It only earned $20 million at the box office in the first week, which was only half of the box office of Lethal Weapon 3. However, the cost of this sequel was 1.5 times that of Lethal Weapon 3. Although he had an impression of it in his memory, Eric still took the time to watch the movie in the cinema in person. Because Alien 3 was the same as the previous two movies, it still had a famous director, David Fincher. As a director who started out by shooting music videos, David Fincher seemed to have become a different person after picking up the movie guide. Although it was his first movie, Alien 3 had already reflected David Fincher's classic dark thriller style. The $20 million box office in the first week was far below Fox's expectations. Based on the movie's reputation, the North American box office of this sequel was likely to not even reach the cost line. If there were no external interference, David Fincher would definitely return to his original business of shooting music videos for a few more years. A week after the movie was released, Eric heard that Fox had terminated the contract with David Fincher. At the same time, a senior executive in Fox's production department who had recommended David Fincher to be the director was also kicked out of the company. Although Eric was very interested in David Fincher, he was not in a hurry to contact him. After all, no studio would invite this rookie director who had just messed up the Alien series in the short term. Originally, Disney planned to release Nuns Go Crazy in the last week of May. However, after Eric's special instructions, Disney changed the release date of Nuns Go Crazy to July 10th in order to avoid bumping into the blockbusters released in June. Starting from late May, Eric led the production team of Tornado to start the final promotion of the movie. Although Eric's movies did not have a fixed style, the excellent quality of each movie still accumulated a large number of fans. In addition, the movie was released after 2 years, and the visual impact of the trailer at the Super Bowl, the fans were generally full of high expectations for Tornado. At the end of May, after several rounds of pre-screening, reviews of Tornado appeared in the media one after another. Although many film critics did not have a high evaluation of this popcorn movie without any connotation, it could not be denied that the scenes in the movie were breathtaking and realistic CG effects. Under the public relations of Firefly, Tornado also won a good reputation. With everything in place, May finally came to an end. The storm of the Los Angeles riots seemed to have completely died down. Whether it was the newspapers or the television media, they rarely mentioned this world-shaking event. After all, it was not a very glorious thing, either internally or externally. However, it was not so easy to forget what had happened. Not only that, some people even wanted to let people remember these things more deeply in order to bring about some reflection. For example, in front of them, there was such a person sitting in Eric's office. A woman. She was tall, with a straight back and a beautiful face with a bit of heroic spirit. She wore a black slim-fit jacket, dark blue jeans, and a pair of hard-soled leather boots on her feet. She seemed to be always so meticulous. This was a very heart-wrenching riot. There were many links before it happened. If we had paid a little attention, this tragedy would definitely not have happened again. But now, it seems that no one is willing to carefully reflect on the root cause of this tragedy. So, I want to make a documentary about this incident. The specific materials are all here. Catherine Bigelow said as she pushed a thick folder in front of Eric. She retracted her hand and added with some hesitation, "This documentary will definitely not affect the production of Saving Private Ryan. I will produce the documentary before the end of the year, and it will only require a budget of $5 million. Eric nodded and opened the folder. He took out the thick printed documents and lowered his head to read them. Catherine Bigelow could not see Eric's expression when he lowered his head, so she turned her attention to the hand that was flipping the pages. Eric's speed of flipping the pages was neither fast nor slow. Catherine Bigelow waited quietly for a while and suddenly couldn't help but say, "Don't tell me you already know?" Eric looked up at the woman, closed the project documents in front of him, opened the file cabinet next to him, and quickly took out 2 similar folders. For some reason, Catherine, who saw these, felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. She had a rare impulse to lower her head to avoid Eric's gaze. I got this from Warner's president, Robert Daly, a week ago. This one was given to me by Fox. It's so sad, Catherine. I didn't expect to be your last choice. I always thought we were good friends. After noticing the subtle change in the woman's expression, Eric deliberately showed a pained expression. It's not like that. The reason why I contacted Warner and Fox first was because Warner's CNN and Fox's Fox News had enough news material to use, Catherine Bigelow explained in a slightly faster tone. However, she soon noticed the unconcealable smile on Eric's face. She realized that this little man was habitually teasing her again. The woman immediately put away her expression. Eric, you're doing this again, you. The woman was somewhat clumsily searching for suitable words to condemn him when Eric had already raised his hands in surrender. Okay, Catherine, let's stop joking. Let's talk about the documentary. Catherine was stunned. She was a little helpless, but she still made a please go ahead expression. Okay. Eric twirled the paper in front of him with his fingers and said in a somewhat serious tone. Although some media blame the high unemployment rate in recent years and the huge illegal immigrant group in Los Angeles, in fact, everyone knows that the root cause of the Los Angeles riots is the deep-rooted racial conflict. This problem is very special. Even the president didn't dare to bluntly address this problem in his speech on TV. So, what are you going to do? I'm not going to express any opinions. I just want to show the cause and effect of this incident in a documentary from a complete bystander's perspective, Catherine said. She suddenly remembered that the original intention of this idea came from something Eric once said to her about her movie. Thinking of this, the woman could not help but look up at the young man opposite her. The moment their eyes met, she quickly looked away. Eric did not seem to notice this detail and continued. Now is not the right time. The presidential election is coming soon. No matter which side, no one is willing to express too many opinions on this matter. Everyone is trying to downplay this matter. Eric, I'm not a politician, Catherine said seriously. Eric looked at the woman's firm gaze and sighed in his heart. Catherine, you should know that there are always too many people in this world who are used to speculating about the motives of certain things with the most malicious thoughts. Catherine shook her head. I don't care. Okay, then do it. Eric stuffed the documents back into the document bag. I'll help you contact Fox News and ask them to release the news materials they have accumulated some time ago. If it's not enough, I can also try CNN. Thank you, Eric. Catherine was a little touched. In addition to preparing the materials this month, she spent most of her time in contact with Warner Brothers and Fox. However, she had been running into a wall. The two film companies were indifferent to her documentary plan. Warner Brothers was worried about the impact of this incident. After all, if CNN, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, had not released the incomplete law enforcement video first, the storm would not have been so big. During this period, CNN had been under a lot of pressure from all sides. Now that the matter had finally settled down, Warner Brothers was eager for everyone to forget about this incident. Fox, on the other hand, could not see the profit prospects of this documentary. Although the investment of $5 million was not a large amount, Fox was aware that they did not have the hobby of throwing money away. Eric put away the documents and smiled. Is it just a verbal thank you? I thought you would at least treat me to a meal. It's almost time to get off work now. Catherine thought for a while and nodded. Then it's okay. Eric put the documents back into the file cabinet and took out 2 movie tickets. In return, I'll treat you to a movie after dinner. The pre-screening of Tornado. There's no need for that. Catherine was stunned and found an excuse. I don't like to go home too late. Of course I know. It won't affect your rest. I can send you home personally. I have a car. I can go back by myself. Catherine's tone was almost a little flustered. Eric looked at his watch and said, Then it's settled. Where do you want to eat? I'll be your guest. Catherine stood up with Eric and said, A friend recommended a Chinese restaurant nearby. We can go there. The two of them left Firefly's headquarters, and went all the way to a Chinese restaurant with exquisite decoration. However, although Eric saw that there were not many customers in the Chinese restaurant, after they ordered, dinner took a long time to be served. Looking at the skinny dumplings on the plate and the scattered tomato scrambled eggs on the other plate, Eric could not help but complain. "Catherine, I'm really a little suspicious. What was your friend thinking when he recommended this restaurant to you?" Catherine's expression was a little awkward. When they were together in New York last year, she vaguely remembered that Eric liked Chinese food, so she deliberately brought him here. Now she also felt like she was cheated. Maybe we didn't order the right dishes. Don't many Chinese restaurants have some specialty dishes? The other dishes are often more ordinary. Why don't you order something else? Eric looked around. At this time in the evening, if the food in this restaurant was delicious, it would be full. However, there were less than half of the customers now. Forget it. Eric looked at the woman's embarrassed expression and shook his head. He skillfully picked up a dumpling with his chopsticks and tasted it. He said, "Actually, it's not bad. I'll be full if I order one more." "Then order one more," Catherine said. She waved at the waiter who was wearing a very awkward tang suit not far away, and gave a few instructions. Then she said to Eric, "I haven't been here before. Next time, I'll treat you to a restaurant I'm more familiar with." "Of course, no problem. Don't forget, I have a very good memory," Eric said with a smile. "I won't," Catherine imitated Eric. She picked up the chopsticks next to her and tried to pick up the dumplings on the plate. In the end, she gave up and changed to a familiar knife and fork. Perhaps the lousy dinner had diverted some of their attention, but the two of them slowly started chatting again. For more than a year, Catherine had been leading a small team to collect information about World War II, and she regularly handed the collected information to Eric. However, because Catherine deliberately avoided him, the two did not meet much. Eric could only attribute the reason to the fact that it was difficult to guess a woman's mind. He could see that Catherine did not dislike him, but perhaps because the age gap between the two was too big, there had always been some estrangement when they got along. After dinner, Eric and Catherine drove together to a theater on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The tickets in their hands were for the screening at 8 o'clock sharp. When the two arrived, it was already 8:15. They hurriedly bought some popcorn and walked in together. Although there were still a few days before the public release of Tornado, out of absolute confidence in the quality of the film, a small-scale pre-screening had begun a week before the public release. For a movie of poor quality, pre-screening would only cause it to lose its reputation among the audience in advance. However, for a good movie, an appropriate screening would instead accumulate the enthusiasm of the audience. Although Tornado did not have much depth and connotation, it was a standard high-quality popcorn movie. The official release is on June 5th, but so far, Tornado has earned more than $2 million in box office in less than 50 theaters in 3 days. After the two found a seat, Eric couldn't help but show off a little. Chapter 472. When Catherine heard Eric's words, she glanced at him and raised the corner of her lips, but didn't say anything. However, the woman thought that she had caught him in a moment that matched his age. After all, he was just a young boy in his early 20s. Perhaps Catherine herself didn't realize that when she was with Eric, she always habitually captured the words and actions of Eric that were more suitable for his age. Maybe he just wanted to remind her of something. Who knew? After Eric finished his sentence, he didn't speak again. The two quietly turned their attention to the big screen. At this time, the movie had been playing for about 20 minutes. The first storm was about to hit. 2 teams of people rushed to the location of the tornado. Because she had been influenced or poisoned by too many European film masters, Catherine wasn't too interested in this typical commercial film. Of course, living in Hollywood, she didn't hate this kind of commercial film as much as European literary film directors. Catherine just subconsciously put most of her attention on the blonde woman with beautiful eyes wearing a white vest in the movie. The woman's performance in the interaction with the male lead's new girlfriend was very good. Although she deliberately dressed up for the role of a meteorologist, it still couldn't hide the woman's beautiful appearance. In the dim light, she secretly glanced at Eric. She knew that the female lead named Joanna Pakula in the movie was still the woman of the man next to her. This greedy little bastard. Feeling the woman's gaze, Eric looked over questioningly. Catherine quickly turned her head and looked at the big screen again. Soon, the protagonist's team encountered the first tornado. Looking at the scene on the screen where the tornado rolled up the trucks and tractors one by one with terrifying momentum, Catherine finally felt a little shocked. As a film director, she knew that no company had ever made such realistic tornado special effects before. The surrounding audience also let out a low exclamation at this time. With the appearance of the first tornado, the pace of the movie accelerated. On average, there would be a hurricane scene every 10 minutes, which was too much for the eyes to take in. The cool scene attracted a burst of exclamations from time to time. Because tornado appeared a few years in advance before this in terms of CG special effects, only Terminator 2, which used liquid metal robot special effects, caused a similar sensation. The audience hadn't experienced the impact of CG special effects such as Jurassic Park yet. Therefore, it brought about such an enthusiastic reaction from the live audience. When the movie ended with the majestic symphony sound, the theater was already filled with applause before the lights were turned on. The two followed the crowd out of the theater and walked slowly toward the parking lot. Catherine said, "The soundtrack of the movie is very nice." Eric said, "I have a sample of the soundtrack. I'll give you a copy." "Thank you." Catherine didn't refuse. She couldn't help but say, "The female lead is also very beautiful." I can't give this to you," Eric joked. Catherine smiled, and the two walked to the car together. Eric considerately opened the door for the woman and watched her get in the car. He leaned against the door and asked with a smile, "Are you sure you don't want me to send you back?" Catherine glared at him and didn't say anything. She continued to fasten her seatbelt. "How about you send me back? I don't mind." Eric looked at the woman's movements and continued to smile. Catherine fastened her seatbelt, turned her head, and forced Eric away with her eyes. She reached out and slammed the door. With the sound of the engine, the white BMW drove on the road. It first drove slowly for a short distance, then suddenly accelerated. It was as if it would be pressed down by a giant beast if it slowed down for a second. Eric watched the woman's car disappear into the traffic. He shrugged and whispered to himself. He smiled and walked to his car. Catherine drove all the way back to her residence in Coldwater Canyon in Beverly Hills. She felt that her somewhat rapid heartbeat had calmed down a lot. She parked the car, opened the door and walked into the living room. Hearing the sound of the door opening, a furry little guy meowed and ran over. It was probably starving. Catherine took the cat food and poured it into the little guy's bowl. Then, she leaned against the sofa in the living room tiredly. After some time, the yellow kitten with big ears walked over with small steps after it was full. It jumped lightly onto the sofa and leaned over. Catherine carried the little fellow over and placed her on her lap. Bossy said, "Bossy, do you also think that I'm a boring woman?" The little guy, who was comfortable lying on its owner's lap, just curled its furry body into a ball. It found a more comfortable position and narrowed its eyes. It had no intention of answering its owner at all. Catherine looked at the little guy's lazy appearance. She reached out and gently pulled the kitten's big ears. An inaudible sigh floated in the air. After the last period of craziness, the time for Tornado to be released finally came. This was the first big-budget movie released by Firefly Pictures after acquiring Disney. Several other Hollywood film companies had their eyes on this movie. Although Tornado had accumulated a very solid reputation after several rounds of pre-screening, no one knew how much the movie's box office potential was until the moment it was released on a large scale. After all, there were cases of movies that received good reviews during pre-screening, but failed at the box office. On the evening of June 4th, Tornado held a grand premiere at the Chinese Grand Theater in Hollywood. It was officially released in more than 2,600 theaters in North America. An amazing special effects movie. After 2 years of dormancy, Eric Williams has brought us a gorgeous visual feast. A balanced plot, amazing CG special effects, gorgeous and magnificent soundtrack. This young Hollywood mogul has once again brought us a surprise. After watching this movie, I only have one worry. Maybe in the future, our big screen will be occupied by this kind of realistic CG special effects, and we will lose the essence of a movie as a story carrier. Digital special effects companies may bring Hollywood into a new era. On June 5th, after the midnight public screening, large-scale film reviews once again appeared in various media. Most of the print media gave Tornado a very high score, and most of the countless film reviews were full of praise. Although it was inevitable that some extremely conservative film critics habitually criticized the movie, under this general trend, it did not affect anything at all. With everyone's expectations, on June 6th, the box office of Tornado was released. Although Firefly Pictures did not release specific data to the outside world, the Hollywood film companies and entertainment media, who had been paying attention to this matter, quickly got the detailed figures through their respective channels. 14.5 million US dollars on the first day. Seeing this number, many people had an indescribable sense of numbness. They felt surprised, but they also felt that it was reasonable. According to the box office pattern of the first week of a movie, after Friday, the box office would rise on Saturday and fall again on the weekend. Tornado was expected to earn about 45 million US dollars in the first 3 days of the weekend. The box office of the summer weekday was generally about half of the box office of the weekend. In this way, the box office of Tornado could reach 70 million US dollars in the first week. In the office of the CEO of Columbia Pictures, Peter Guber had a bad feeling when he saw the box office data in his hand. According to the current reputation of Tornado, even next week, the box office would not fall too much. It would still be between 40 million US dollars and 50 million US dollars. The average weekly box office in North America during the summer was only about 100 million US dollars. Dark War prequel was likely to compete with more than a dozen other movies for the remaining 50 million US dollars box office. After the early test screenings, many film critics and audiences generally expressed varying degrees of dissatisfaction with Dark War prequel. They thought that this prequel movie had completely lost the film style created by Eric in the first movie, and became a mediocre action movie. Although the action scenes in the movie were spectacular and gorgeous, in the face of the realistic CG effects of Tornado, these did not seem to be very competitive. What's more, a week after the release of Dark War prequel, Warner's Batman Returns would also be released. Under the attack of two blockbusters, Peter Guber could not help but shudder. Originally, Columbia also signed a cooperation agreement with Tom Cruise's production company for 3 movies, but now it seemed that this cooperation would have to be reconsidered. Peter Guber couldn't help but think of the Mr. and Mrs. Smith that was being produced. He had been in Hollywood for decades. Even if he couldn't make a good movie, his vision in movies was absolutely unquestionable. Such a novel plot and a new shooting concept was almost certain to be successful as long as there were no major accidents. Peter Guber quickly thought it through. If he wanted to keep his current position, he had to hold on to the cooperation with Firefly Pictures. After making the decision, Peter Guber picked up the phone on his desk and dialed Eric's number. "Hi Eric, this is Peter Guber. Of course, it's okay, I just want to congratulate you." In the carnival of the summer movie fans, the box office for the first week of the movie was finally released. Tornado earned a total of more than $65 million in box office in 7 days. Coupled with the previous week's small-scale movie, the total box office just exceeded the film cost of $70 million. Many people who originally expected the box office of Tornado to decline had their last glimmer of hope shattered. Those who wanted to cooperate with Firefly also put away their disappointment and picked up the phone again to dial Eric's number. Eric was bombarded with phone calls again, just like when the box office was released on the first day. "Of course, Chris, you can decide on this matter. $2 million a year it is. Haha, I didn't say that I have so much money that I can't spend it all. I just believe that you won't let me suffer a loss. Well, to be honest, I enjoy hearing those people call to congratulate me. Okay, I'm not going to talk nonsense with you. I'm busy here. If you want, you can fly over to attend the celebration party for Tornado tonight. It will be more lively." Then I'm hanging up. Eric hung up the phone and handed it to his assistant behind him. After a Hollywood director finished a movie, he often took a vacation and had a good rest. At the same time, he experienced the success or failure of the movie. However, although Tornado almost broke the box office record for the first week of the Hollywood film, Eric did not have much time to stop and enjoy the flowers and wine. Chris, who was far away in New York, had just called to discuss the donation amount to the World Wide Web Foundation with Eric. He also told him that the framework of IE had been set up. In addition to Tim Berners-Lee, who was the company's consultant, Chris had not only hired dozens of software engineers, but also a senior manager from Oracle to be the director of IE. In order to facilitate interaction with the World Wide Web Alliance, IE's headquarters were temporarily set in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was located. The beta version of IE was expected to be launched at the end of the year. In addition to IE, the other two companies were also preparing in an orderly manner. According to Eric's plan, these two companies would be officially launched after the beta version of IE was launched. Therefore, Chris's main focus was still on IE. Someone in the open space in front of him shouted something through the loudspeaker, which woke Eric up from his thoughts. This was a square in the Firefly Cineplex. After the shout, the behemoth in the center of the square started to move slowly. It moved forward, leaned down bit, roared when the T-Rex model, which took a dozen special effects artists a few months of hard work, successfully completed the various test movements. Everyone was relieved and cheered. "How is it, Eric?" Stan Winston ran over excitedly. Although he knew that the development center of the digital domain was in CG special effects, after so many years of doing special effects, Stan was very excited and proud to see another model being completed by his team. "Very good," Eric praised without hesitation. "I believe this big guy will surprise everyone next year." "Of course, it's definitely not much worse than the hurricane and tornado," Stan said confidently. He then said, "Then let's take a look at the Velociraptor model." Under the personal command of Stan Winston, the T-Rex model was carefully dragged back to the warehouse. A few smaller Velociraptor models were quickly pulled out by the staff. Chapter 473. In the banquet hall of the Hilton Hotel, Paramount CEO Frank Mancuso said with a half sigh and half schadenfreude, "12 million on the first day. That's a pretty good start. Yesterday's Saturday box office should have gone up, but it dropped to 9.5 million. If nothing goes wrong, it will drop again today. It's a pity that such a good series is ruined. Although the box office may exceed 40 million in the first week, the next week's box office will drop by more than 50%, or even more." Robert Daly, the president of Warner Brothers, glanced at Chong Peters, who was holding a coquettish woman not far away, and sneered. Only those two idiots would let Tom Cruise tamper with this project. The main storyline of the Dark War series should be Tom Hanks as the main lead, and paired with Joe Pesci, a humorous supporting character. Every movie should find a criminal with a distinct image. This is the safest way to continue the series, and not be changed into a laughable action movie. It's safer for Tom Cruise to act in a literary film. He wants to be independent, so Paramount had no choice but to terminate the contract with him. 2 years ago, Paramount was barely able to recoup the cost of Thunder Aspirations until now. "Robert, I heard that Eric Williams will be the executive producer of Warner's Bodyguard?" Robert Daly knew that Frank Mancuso must have said that because he wanted to get involved in the movie. However, the production cost of The Bodyguard was not too high. In addition, there was Eric and Kevin Costner, who had just won the Oscar for Dances with Wolves, participating in the movie. There was almost no possibility of the movie losing money. Warner Brothers would certainly not allow Paramount to participate. "Yes, but the cost of this movie will not exceed $30 million. Warner Brothers has more than enough to handle it." Frank Mancuso didn't have high hopes to begin with, so he obviously wasn't disappointed. He turned his head to look around and said, "Eric Williams still hasn't appeared. Youngsters these days are getting more and more arrogant." Robert Daly did not agree with Frank Mancuso, but he knew that although it was the weekend, Eric was still busy with Jurassic Park. What an energetic young man. Robert Daly was a little envious when he recalled the news about Jurassic Park that he had obtained from some sources. Based on the special effects that Digital Domain had displayed on Tornado, Robert Daly realized that Jurassic Park was likely to bring about another visual spectacle. Normally, there would not be so many senior executives of the 7 major companies present at the celebration banquet for Tornado tonight. However, everyone saw the great potential of the Digital Domain special effects company and rushed over. This scene was just like the birth of Star Wars more than 10 years ago. Before this, although Eric had continuously produced high box office movies, the other major movie companies could completely produce those movies. However, the level of special effects technology displayed by Tornado was no longer something that the special effects departments of other companies could produce independently. This was because Eric had consecutively handed over the epic-making special effects movies such as Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, and Tornado to Digital Domain. With the technical accumulation of these movies, Digital Domain had far surpassed Industrial Light and Magic in terms of computer CG special effects. Although after the release of Tornado, the media was only speculating about the arrival of the computer CG era. However, the sensitive Hollywood studios had already realized that a new era was coming from the disaster film series and the Jurassic Park series. Industrial Light and Magic's position in the industry was destined to be replaced by Digital Domain. There was a commotion at the entrance of the banquet hall. Robert Daly did not need to look to know that Eric had finally arrived. However, he did not rush over like the other small fries. Instead, he calmly changed his glass of champagne. After a while, when Eric finished dealing with the people around him, he walked over with Frank Mancuso. "Eric, congratulations. Oh, and this is Miss Pakula." Robert Daly and Frank Mancuso greeted Eric together. "Thank you." Eric and Joanna Pakula, who was gently holding his arm, smiled and raised their glasses of champagne. The 4 of them raised their glasses to their lips and took a sip. Robert Daly was the first to speak. "Eric, I heard that you are going to make a documentary about the Los Angeles riots. If you need any information from CNN, you can call me at any time." Eric nodded and thanked him again. He did not reject Robert Daly's kindness. Moreover, Eric also knew that Robert Daly was not being polite to him. He was sincerely trying to be friendly with him. Because the CEO of Warner Brothers, Steve Ross, was critically ill, the 2 co-CEOs, Robert Daly and Terry Semel, were competing for the CEO position even more fiercely. The reason why Steve Ross was able to sit firmly in the CEO position of Warner Brothers over the years was that he had roped in well-known Hollywood filmmakers such as Steven Spielberg, Clint Eastwood, and Tim Burton. Robert Daly was probably trying to get on Steve Ross's good side at this time. Now that Steve Ross was completely unable to handle the daily affairs of Warner Brothers, if Eric clearly expressed his support for Robert Daly, and with Robert Daly's help, they could reach some film cooperation with Warner Brothers, Robert Daly would definitely be able to defeat Terry Semel and ascend to the CEO position. After all, although Warner Brothers and Firefly were competitors, Firefly's performance in the film business was so eye-catching that the shareholders of Warner Brothers would not go against their interests. However, Eric would definitely not agree to help Robert Daly just because of his insignificant kindness. After all, looking at the overall situation, the worse the internal strife in Warner Brothers, the better it would be for the other major film companies. After chatting with Robert Daly for a while, Eric did not neglect Frank Mancuso. "Mr. Mancuso, I heard that Lei Sherdong and Barry Diller are both eyeing Paramount, right?" Although Frank Mancuso was the CEO of Paramount, in terms of power, he was not even as powerful as Robert Daly, the CEO of Warner Brothers, of course. Of course, it was not because Paramount was not as big as Warner Brothers, but because Frank Mancuso had always been suppressed by Martin Davis, the major shareholder and chairman of the board of directors of Paramount. Hearing this question, Frank Mancuso just shrugged. He was a little embarrassed and helpless. "Mr. Davis is in charge of these things. I'm only responsible for the daily management of Paramount." Eric was just curious and had no intention of poking at Frank Mancuso's sore spot. Therefore, he quickly changed the topic. After all, the cocktail party was not a place to talk about business. In such an occasion, if both parties could really come to some agreement on cooperation, They would only agree on another time to discuss it in detail. Therefore, Eric chatted with Robert Daly and Frank Mancuso for a while, then held Joanna's arm and walked to the others. Other than his own people, the executives of the other 6 companies were all present. Michael, I'm glad you could come tonight. Eric walked toward Michael Eisner under the guessing gazes of some people. Michael Eisner smiled and nodded at Joanna before saying, "Don't tell me you don't welcome me? How is that possible?" Eric smiled and shook his head. The two of them chatted for a while. When they were about to leave, Joanna whispered, "Eric, the people at the party don't seem to like him very much." Eric said, "It's not that they don't like him, but they're expressing their attitude. The Fireflies are the stars of the show tonight. Michael Eisner and I will definitely have some disputes." Thinking of Michael Eisner's lonely appearance just now, Eric paid more attention to Michael Eisner in his heart. Not everyone had the courage to appear at such an occasion where they were destined to be ignored. According to what he said, in the past few months, Michael Eisner had been discussing cooperation with Industrial Light and Magic. He had also flown to Japan more than 10 times in a row, and obtained a film investment of no less than $500 million from Panasonic for Universal. In the next 2 years, as long as Michael Eisner could show the vigor he had when he first took over Disney, he would definitely lead Universal Pictures to rise. Joanna did not think so much in her heart. After hearing Eric's words, she nodded, not fully understanding. Seeing Virginia waving at her from not far away, Joanna let go of Eric's arm and said, "Vicky is calling me. I'm going to her." Eric looked at the petite figure not far away and asked with a smile, "Both of you haven't been on a diet recently, have you? Why do I see that both of you have lost some weight?" "We found the same nutritionist. Isn't it better to be skinnier?" Joanna asked with a smile. Eric raised his hand and wanted to touch Joanna's cheek, but after realizing the occasion, he put it down. Vicky would of course look better if she was skinnier. You don't have to learn from her diet. If you are too skinny, your face will be slightly sunken, and you will give people the impression that you are always unhappy. It can't be that serious, right? Joanna felt her cheeks without any scruples and quickly said, "Okay then, I'll listen to you." Watching Joanna leave, Eric looked around, but he didn't find any other women. Unknowingly, the women had been divided into small groups, and there was a clear distinction between them. Tornado was a movie starring Joanna. Except for Virginia, who was a good friend, the other women didn't appear on this occasion. "Good evening, Eric." A voice sounded in his ear. Eric turned around and saw Chong Peters raising his glass to him with a smile. However, what surprised Eric was the sexy woman beside Chong Peters. Eric could not help but look at her a few more times. The sexy woman with slightly darker skin noticed the change in Eric's eyes and generously took the initiative to reach out her hand. "Hello, Mr. Williams. My name is Catherine Zeta-Jones." "Hello, Miss Catherine. You are so beautiful." Eric gently shook her small hand. Chong Peters knew Eric's character very well. When he saw the woman beside him interacting with Eric, he subconsciously reached out to hold the woman's waist and said, "Eric, Peter asked me to apologize to you on his behalf. He has something to do in Europe and can't come today." Feeling the hand on her waist, Catherine Zeta-Jones' body stiffened a little. But the smile on her face didn't change at all. She took a small step back without leaving a trace and leaned against Chong Peters again. "Of course it's okay." Eric withdrew his gaze from Catherine Zeta-Jones and dealt with Chong Peters. Although there was nothing unusual on the surface, Eric felt a little emotional. This emotional feeling was not because he met another beautiful woman from his memory, but because of the personal experience of Catherine Zeta-Jones. Chong Peters, Steven Spielberg, and Michael Douglas. These 3 names, no matter which one it was, were all powerful figures in Hollywood. Although Chong Peters was recognized by many people in Hollywood as an idiot, his identity as the president of Columbia Pictures made him the target of many low-level figures in Hollywood. Needless to say, Steven Spielberg and Michael Douglas came from an acting family. Although he was only an actor, he also had strong connections in Hollywood with the accumulation of several generations. And these 3 people were at the top of the Hollywood pyramid, but their lives were interrupted by a woman from an ordinary family in Wales. Although Catherine Zeta-Jones had a beauty that many people envied, in Hollywood, beauty was the most abundant thing. Therefore, while Eric admired this woman's means, he was also very curious about how this woman had a relationship with these three powerful figures in Hollywood. Chong Peters looked at Eric's absent-minded look and felt a strange pride in his heart. His hand holding Catherine Zeta-Jones involuntarily tightened. He smiled and said, "Eric, what's wrong with you?" "Nothing, I suddenly thought of something." Eric looked at the half-smile on Chong Peters' face and realized that his appearance just now must have been seen by Chong Peters. At the same time, there was some misunderstanding. However, Eric did not mean to explain, and simply found an excuse to change the topic. "Right about Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Eric, have you been to their set recently?" "I have been there twice. I don't know why, but I always feel that the Hong Kong director's shooting technique is a bit strange." Eric nodded. "The shooting technique of Hong Kong and Hollywood is still very different, but don't worry, I have been paying attention to this movie. There will definitely be no problems." "In that case, I am relieved." Chong Peters seemed to be really relieved and said. Chapter 474. Taking advantage of the pause between the two, Catherine Zeta-Jones said, "Are you talking about Mr. and Mrs. Smith?" Eric looked at the woman and replied, "Yes, Catherine, are you interested in this movie too?" "Of course," Catherine Zeta-Jones said. "This is a movie that you personally wrote. When I was in the UK, I watched most of your films. My favorite is Terror on a Small Island. The plot setup and the final plot reversal are incredible." "Thank you for your compliment, Catherine. A beautiful lady like you must be an actress, right?" Catherine nodded. "I'm about to play a role in the ABC series Young Indiana Jones." "It's just a TV series. I think you're more suitable for a movie." "Oh, of course, I don't need to worry about that," Eric said with a smile, raised his glass to Chong Peters and left. "Let's go, dear," Chong Peters said as he held the woman's waist. Catherine Zeta-Jones's mind was spinning with Eric's words just now. She followed Chong Peters to a corner of the reception. "Babe, I want to talk to you about something," Chong Peters said as he sat down on the sofa with the girl. He held her soft little hand and said. Catherine Zeta-Jones listened attentively, but she had a bad feeling in her heart. "It's like this, I recently divorced her, so I think." Chong Peters paused and quickly made up his mind and continued. "I mean, dear, will you marry me?" Although Zeta-Jones was mentally prepared, she was still a little confused when she heard this. The reason why she agreed to date this Hollywood producer was because of his power in Hollywood. Not to mention that the man beside her was more than 20 years older than her. Chong Peters was also very irritable and arrogant. Their relationship was basically the result of Zeta-Jones's hypocrisy. Therefore, Zeta-Jones had never thought of marrying him. She had planned to date him for a few years, establish herself in Hollywood, and then break up with him. She had not expected Chong Peters to suddenly propose to her. Moreover, Zeta-Jones remembered that Chong Peters had said that he hoped that his wife could be a full-time housewife after marriage. This was something that she absolutely couldn't tolerate. She was only in her early 20s. In any case, it was impossible for her to agree to marry a man who was more than 20 years older than her to be a full-time housewife. "Catherine, are you listening to me?" Seeing the obvious shock and hesitation on Zeta-Jones' face, Chong Peters raised his voice in displeasure. "I'm sorry, Chong. I've never thought about it." Zeta-Jones shook his head in a panic. "Can you give me some time to think about it? Is there even a need to consider this? Marry me. I'll let you live a rich and decent life. In the future, you don't even have to appear in public to act. I can completely support you." Chong Peters' tone was full of confidence, or rather, self-righteousness. Zeta-Jones avoided Chong Peters' gaze and inadvertently caught a glimpse of Eric's figure not far away. She immediately understood that the man must have intentionally or unintentionally provoked Chong Peters to make him propose at the party. The girl, who was in a dilemma, cursed in her heart. Facing Chong Peters' aggressive gaze, she didn't know how to deal with it. She knew that as long as she opened her mouth to refuse, the man in front of her would immediately turn hostile. It was even more impossible for her to agree. Although Chong Peters had all kinds of personality flaws and mediocre talent, he was not a fool. Looking at Zeta-Jones' hesitation, he gradually understood something and his face became gloomy. I think you'd better not act in Young Indiana Jones. I'll let Michael find another actress for the role of Maya. Zeta-Jones said uneasily, Chong, I didn't mean that. Say no more. Chong Peters stood up and looked coldly at the woman on the sofa. Ms. Zeta-Jones, I hate it when people play tricks on me. Do you think you can treat me as a stepping stone to climb up in Hollywood and kick me aside afterward? Do you think there's such a good thing in the world? Zeta-Jones wanted to refute. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. The man in front of her had already fallen into a paranoid thought. She knew that it was useless to say anything else. Chong Peters put aside the goblet that was still in his hand, straightened his sleeves, and looked sympathetically at the woman sitting on the sofa. Hollywood isn't a place where a pretty face can make a name for yourself. So, I think you'd better pack up your heart tomorrow and return to England. Zeta-Jones felt a little desperate. Chong Peters' words meant that he had completely turned against her. Even if she continued to stay in Hollywood, she would be obstructed by Chong Peters. He was the president of one of the 7 major film companies. It was too easy for him to obstruct an actress who was born in a low-class family in England. Now it was the celebration party of Tornado, so Chong Peters couldn't go too far. However, after saying these words, he was no longer in the mood to stay at the party. After greeting his acquaintances, he turned and left the banquet hall. I see that you have a malicious smile on your face. Are you planning to do something bad again? Joanna asked doubtfully as she handed the plate to Eric and looked at the man's expression. Eric said exaggeratedly, How is that possible? I'm honest and kind. I only know how to do good things. Joanna listened to Eric's nonsense, but she was sure that he must have done something bad. What are you talking about? Virginia came over at this time. She gently pulled up the hem of her evening dress and sat down beside Eric. Joanna pointed at Eric and said, He just did something bad. Virginia raised her eyebrows, looked at Joanna, and then looked at Eric. She said with a look of surprise, So fast. I only left for 10 minutes. Joanna was stunned, and her face was slightly red. She reached out and pinched Virginia. Who told you to talk nonsense? Virginia smiled and dodged. After Joanna let her go, she asked, Eric, what's going on? Nothing, I just said a few more words. Eric looked up at the banquet hall and didn't see Zeta-Jones. He thought of the situation when Chong Peters said goodbye to him alone and shrugged. Chong Peters was not only not smart, but also stubborn. He just provoked him a little, but he didn't expect him to react so quickly. Seeing that Eric didn't want to say more, the two women didn't ask any more. Virginia stood up and stretched out her hand to Joanna. Let's not accompany this bad guy here. Let's go dance. Eric looked at Joanna indifferently and said with a smile, You two are such good sisters. They will only envy me if you dance together. All the people invited to the celebration party were people in the Hollywood circle. Although they didn't say it, they were well aware of the relationship between Eric, Joanna, and Virginia. The two women had been very intimate throughout the party, which had already aroused the envy of many people for Eric's enjoyment of the happiness of having 2 wives. Virginia rolled her eyes at Eric. Have fun for a while. Chong and I will go back to Beverly Hills later. You can go wherever you want tonight. Don't disturb us. After that, the two women left Eric and went to the dance floor with faint laughter without waiting for Eric to answer. Mr. Schultz, thank you for coming in person today. At the door of the living room, Eric sent off the last wave of guests. He looked at the waiter who had begun to clean the hall, and breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to go home, a waiter of the hotel came over. Mr. Williams, I think you'd better take a look. Eric followed the waiter to the corner of the banquet hall, and saw a drunk black-haired beauty lying on the sofa. Her dress was a little messy, and her body exuded a mixture of alcohol and perfume, with a strange charm. Eric sighed a little awkwardly. He was about to ask the waiter next to him to arrange a room for Catherine Zeta-Jones, but he saw the waiter next to him staring at the beauty on the sofa. He unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and made a clear swallowing sound. This made Eric dispel the idea. If he had just been dumped by someone else and met another waiter with bad intentions, it would be too tragic. You don't have to worry about it. I'll take care of it. Eric waved at the waiter and called the hotel manager over to give him some instructions. Then he reached out to hug the girl on the sofa and left the banquet hall. Although the waiter responsible for operating the elevator for Eric was very curious, he stood by the side without looking sideways. The driver and bodyguards who were already waiting in the car saw Eric appear with a woman in his arms. They were not surprised and respectfully opened the car door for Eric. Catherine Zeta-Jones's alcohol tolerance was actually very good. Unfortunately, she was dumped on the spot at the party. It was inevitable that she would feel a sense of self-pity and inevitably drank a little more. Unknowingly, she passed out on the sofa. However, when she realized that she was being picked up by the man, Catherine Zeta-Jones was almost awake. Although her head was still dizzy, she had already realized what had happened. Feeling that she was held in the arms of the man's strong arms, Zeta-Jones, who was disappointed, inexplicably felt a strange sense of security. Although she liked to cling to the powerful in Hollywood, she was not so cheap that she would let someone take her home. She originally planned to wake up and then go back to her residence, but the sense of security in the man's arms made her change her original idea. She decided not to wake up. After relaxing like this, she quickly leaned against the car seat and fell asleep. She didn't even feel that she had fallen on the man's lap. She didn't know how much time had passed before the car stopped, and she was carried out of the car. The cool night air made her sober up again. Although the initial impulse had dissipated, she also realized that it was this hateful man who was holding her. He had used some untraceable words to ruin her relationship with Chong Peters. She should hate him. Hesitating like this, she felt the surrounding air warm up again. Soon, she was placed on a large bed. This was the last chance. Although she hadn't been in Hollywood for long, she was still very familiar with Eric Williams. How could such a playboy let her go? What should I do now? Pretend that I just woke up. What if he forced me to do something? Or, what if he didn't do anything and let her leave? What would she do then? The woman struggled for a few seconds in her heart. Before she could make up her mind, she felt a thin quilt covering her body, and then there was a slight sound of the door closing. She could finally open her eyes with relief. The room was dark and unfamiliar, but Catherine Zeta-Jones didn't feel any fear. After waiting silently for a while to make sure that he had really left and wouldn't return, the woman unconsciously closed her eyes again and indulged in the endless dark dream. Perhaps it was because of the unfamiliar environment or some other reason. Although her head was still a little dazed after a night of rest, she still woke up very early. This was a bedroom on the second floor of the villa facing south. Perhaps because of some negligence, the curtains weren't drawn. She could see the dark red morning sun outside the window. Wrapped in the quilt and barefoot, she walked to the window. What entered her eyes was the endless deep sea. Because it was a little early, the color of the sea appeared dark, and a layer of light orange scales was spread on it with the breeze. It looked very spectacular. However, she wasn't in the mood to look at this. She put the quilt back on the bed and pulled up the shoulder straps of the dress that had slipped off her arm. She walked around the room and went into the bathroom first to take a quick shower. She threw the dress that reeked of alcohol aside and found a pink bath towel to put on. At the same time, she couldn't help but have other thoughts. The bath towel in this man's room was actually pink. With that thought in mind, she looked around and opened a pocket cabinet next to the bathroom door. Sure enough, there were brand new toiletries inside. She took out a toothbrush, brushed her teeth carefully, and slowly washed her face. Finally, she walked out of the guest room. She had seen the famous Freedom City in magazines, but she had never imagined that one day she would be able to walk out of a room in this fantasy villa. Looking at the circular corridor on the second floor, she even had an inexplicable sense of unreality in her heart. Chapter 475. Eric thought that Zeta-Jones would wake up late with a hangover. He didn't expect to see the girl in a pink bathrobe making breakfast in the kitchen. "Good morning, Catherine." Eric sat down in the small dining room that was connected to the kitchen and greeted the figure in the kitchen with a smile. Zeta Jones seemed a little surprised. She looked over and said, "Good morning, Mr. Williams. Is there breakfast for me?" "Of course," Zeta Jones replied. He quickly scooped the fried egg from the frying pan onto a plate and served it to Eric along with the rest of the food he had prepared. Eric thanked her and picked up the cutlery. As he was about to enjoy, he saw that Zeta Jones just sat down next to him. Aware of Eric's doubts, the girl replied, "I don't eat in the morning. This is specially made for you." Eric smiled and divided the breakfast in front of him into 2 portions. He pushed it in front of the girl and said, "You can go and get a glass of milk." Zeta Jones didn't object. She got up and walked to the fridge. She poured a glass of milk and sat down in the same position. "Why were you drunk last night?" Eric asked casually as he spread jam on the bread. Hearing this question, Zeta Jones paused. She glanced at someone who was acting as if nothing had happened and said bitterly, "There was a guy who made trouble at the party and ruined my plan." "Oh, that's a pity. It's not easy to hook up with the president of one of the 7 big Hollywood companies. But I don't think Chang Peters would fall out so easily. What did you do after that?" "I refused his proposal," Zeta Jones said in a low voice, not concealing anything. Eric was stunned at first. Then he laughed without caring about his image. "Proposal, haha. You're playing big. You actually managed to hook up with a Hollywood veteran to propose to you." Zeta Jones glanced at Eric. She seemed to have given up on herself. She was just an ordinary girl from a small town in Wales. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she was now. "Mr. Williams, are you gloating? I thought you were a gentleman. How did you know?" Eric stopped laughing and asked. "For example, last night. So you woke up last night. I thought you were drunk." Eric narrowed his eyes and looked at the woman sitting next to him. The woman in a pink bathrobe exuded a faint feminine fragrance. "You may have misunderstood. It's mainly because you're so drunk that I'm not interested in you. I like women who are half drunk and half awake. These women tend to struggle." Zeta Jones smiled and asked, "The more you struggle, the happier you are." "Bingo," Eric snapped. Although she knew that Eric was joking, Zeta Jones still gave him a look of disdain. Eric completely ignored Zeta Jones's look and asked, "Now that you've lost the golden goose, what are you going to do next?" Zeta Jones gave him a bitter look. "There's one more in front of me. I'm going to try and see if I can get him. If I fail, I'll go back to England and continue to wait." Eric seemed to be numbed by an electric current. He pretended to shiver and said with a frightened look, "I advise you to give up on this idea. Young people like to go to extremes. If you lure someone to the point of proposing to you and then cruelly reject him, it's hard to predict what tragic things will happen. If he really proposes to me, maybe I'll really say yes? Don't. You're still young. Once you step into the grave of marriage, you probably won't be able to climb out. It's better to continue to harm the old men in Hollywood. When you step on those old bones and climb to the top of Hollywood's power, I'll write an autobiography for you for free. I've even thought of the title, The Legendary Life of Catherine Zeta-Jones. The title is really uncreative, but it's understandable. Hollywood directors often have no talent in screenwriting." Eric gritted his teeth and seemed to rack his brain for a while before saying, "How about my struggle? Mr. Chancellor will be angered to death." Eric sighed and shook his head. "Sigh women." Zeta Jones looked at Eric's defeated face, and the corners of her mouth curled up into a beautiful arc. However, the charm quickly collapsed. She suddenly wanted to ask Eric if he looked down on her, but she quickly realized that perhaps this young Hollywood tycoon didn't care about her at all. In that case, what was there to look down on? But how could a young man like him understand the hardships she had to go through to get rid of poverty and climb up the ladder cautiously? Feeling that Zeta Jones suddenly quieted down, Eric turned his head and glanced at the woman. He noticed her expression and asked, "What's wrong? Weren't you fine just now?" "No." Zeta Jones blinked quickly a few times. "Nothing." "Oh." Eric didn't ask further and said, "Do you want me to get someone to buy you a set of clothes?" Zeta Jones shook her head. "No need. I'll wear the dress from last night and leave later. Also, thank you for bringing me back last night, Mr. Williams." "You're welcome." Zeta Jones finished the breakfast in front of her, took out a tissue and wiped her lips elegantly. Then she said with determination, "If one day, don't forget today's promise." "What?" Eric was puzzled. "About helping me write my autobiography, whether it's the legendary life of Catherine Zeta-Jones or my struggle. In short, when that day comes, I will definitely make you fulfill this promise." Eric noticed the determination on the woman's face when she spoke and nodded with a smile. "Okay, but I haven't talked about the fee. I'm very expensive. I'll act in one of your movies for free." After Zeta-Jones made up her mind, she seemed to be more confident. "When the time comes, my salary will definitely not be low." Eric pretended to hesitate for a moment before revealing a reluctant expression. "Then I'll take a loss and promise you." After Eric finished his breakfast, Zeta-Jones carefully washed the dishes and returned to the bedroom to change into the dress from last night. After the woman came out, Eric said, "I'll get the driver to send you?" Zeta-Jones didn't reject Eric's kindness. She expressed her gratitude and the two walked out of the mansion side by side. When the woman was about to get into the car, Eric took out a business card and handed it to Zeta-Jones. "A good friend's business card. He's an executive at ICM. You can find him and say that I introduced you." Zeta-Jones was a little hesitant. Eric smiled and said, "If you mind, I can guarantee that this detail won't appear in your autobiography in the future." Zeta-Jones smiled and took the business card from Eric. She looked at it and saw the name Kapoor sit on it. She vaguely remembered that this was the name of a top agent in Hollywood. "Thank you, Mr. Williams. However, you can truthfully write this plot in my autobiography. Okay." Eric nodded and walked forward to open the car door for the woman. Zeta-Jones lifted her skirt and got in. Eric closed the car door and said a few words to the driver. He watched the black BMW leave. Due to the drastic changes in the movie style, Dark War prequel only earned $40.3 million in the first week, and the box office showed an obvious downward trend for the entire week. The box office estimated that the box office for Dark War prequel might drop by more than 60% in the second week, and this was still a conservative estimate. After all, apart from Tornado, which was still going strong, Batman Returns, which Batman fans had been looking forward to for 2 years, would also be released in the second week of Dark War prequel, which was on June 19th. Under the attack of Tornado and Batman Returns, Dark War prequel was destined to be the most tragic cannon fodder. Compared to the disappointment of Dark War prequel, Tornado's box office results in the second week of release surprised many people, because compared to the first week, Tornado's box office only dropped 15% in the second week, reaching a high of $55 million. It was about $15 million higher than Dark War prequel's box office in the first week. Given this box office trend, it was very likely that Tornado would once again become a film with a total box office of $300 million in North America. Tornado accumulated $120 million in box office in 2 weeks, which also made Hollywood film companies see the box office potential of CG special effects movies. For a time, in addition to the extremely popular digital field, Industrial Light and Magic also became the target of close contact with several other major film companies. As for those newly established small CG special effects companies in Hollywood, they frequently received merger and acquisition invitations from major film companies. In this case, after a discussion between Eric and Stan Winston, they quickly made a decision to expand the scale of the digital domain. They planned to expand the number of fixed CG special effects artists in the digital domain to 1,000 people. The reason why Eric made this decision was not only because of the large increase in the workload of the digital domain. In addition, there was also the consideration of the MEYA software. If they could train as many as 1,000 special effects artists who were proficient in operating the MEYA software in the digital domain, then after these people left their jobs in the future, as long as they stayed in the special effects industry, they would definitely play a very important role in promoting the MEYA software. After seeing the importance of CG special effects, other special effects companies began to develop their own special effects software. However, without enough film projects to accumulate technical experience, Eric knew that those software were destined to be unable to surpass MAYA. As long as he chose the right time to commercialize the MAYA software in a few years, it would definitely bring him a lot of wealth. On June 19th, under the close attention of many people and the anticipation of a large number of fans, Warner Brothers once again released the second big Batman movie, Batman Returns, after 2 years. With Dark War, prequel completely declared a flop, most people turned their attention to the box office battle between Batman Returns and Tornado. Although Tornado was already in its 3rd week of release, relying on the heaven-defying box office trend of the first 2 weeks, even if the box office this week maintained a drop of about 20%, the box office of Tornado in the 3rd week would still reach a high of more than $45 million, which was almost the same as the box office of most movies in their first week of release. Just as Eric had expected, although Batman Returns still maintained Tim Burton's dark style, after the audience was stunned by the first film, it was obvious that they could no longer accept the colder style of the second film. Although Batman Returns still earned more than $55 million at the box office in its first week of release, the reviews of the fans were no longer as high as the first film. At the same time, Tornado still received more than $46 million at the box office, with a total box office of $166 million. Comparing the two, this year's box office champion was probably destined to belong to Tornado. In the second week of Batman Returns' release, the box office had dropped by 45%, which was far more than the 20% drop of the first film in the same period. Although the sequel would definitely be able to recoup its costs based on the current box office trend, under the one-sided crusade of the fans, Warner Brothers was already considering changing the director and male lead of the Batman series. Perhaps wanting to maintain his status in the industry, in the second week of Batman Returns' release, the male lead Michael Keaton took the initiative to reveal to the media that he planned to withdraw from the Batman series. However, Warner Brothers did not respond directly to this. Eric soon heard the news. He knew that in the Batman series in the 90s, almost every main creator would make a complete update by the 3rd and 4th film. Therefore, he could understand that Michael Keaton was taking the initiative to find a way out for himself. However, without the halo of the male lead of Batman, Michael Keaton would definitely not have any big development in Hollywood in the future. In 10 or 20 years, when he reminisced about the past, this former superhero would appear in a movie called Birdman to reminisce about the past and try for an Oscar at the same time. However, these were not things that Eric cared about. July was coming, and all the preliminary preparations for Jurassic Park were in place, and filming could start at any time. But after some consideration, Eric decided to wait for another summer release of Firefly before setting off for Kauai, Hawaii, where Jurassic Park was mainly filmed. Chapter 476. The filming of Jurassic Park in Kauai will take about 10 to 12 weeks. During this period, if there are no urgent matters, I will only contact Los Angeles through the phone. I hope everyone can do their jobs well. Eric summarized as he sorted out the information in front of him. The presidents, vice presidents, and department managers in the conference room nodded in agreement. After the meeting was adjourned, Eric stopped the executives of Firefly and Disney as usual. "Eric, is there anything else?" Jeffrey asked after they followed Eric to his office. "It's about Columbia," Eric said. He took out the documents from the filing cabinet and handed them to Jeffrey, Michael Lynn, Katzenberg, and Frank Wales. When it came to Columbia, Jeffrey and the others actually understood what Eric meant. Eric was definitely not going to talk about the cooperation with Columbia, but the division of Columbia's distribution channels. After a few months of operation, not only did Firefly get most of Columbia's distribution resources in South America, but through Peter Guber's layoffs and other measures, the distribution resources in European countries also began to flow into Firefly. Although Columbia could not lay off all the subsidiaries in Europe, the world's second largest market, it was easy to lay off some of them. In order to hide the real purpose, Firefly only recruited about half of the employees from the subsidiaries that were laid off. The other half who were really laid off could only admit that they were unlucky. After receiving a certain salary increase from Firefly and seeing the plight of the employees who were really laid off, The employees who were recruited by Firefly did not express any dissatisfaction. There was no such thing as an airtight wall in the world. The Japanese gradually realized something was wrong and raised doubts to the Columbia management. However, Peter Guber used his trump card to block them. This trump card was very simple: resignation. In the face of Sony's doubts, Peter Guber personally called Morita Akio and said that if the Sony headquarters did not trust his reform measures, he could submit his resignation to the board of directors. To many people's surprise, this lousy move actually worked. In Eric's opinion, it was unbelievable. Usually, only the company's management who had achieved extraordinary results had the confidence to use the resignation threat card. Peter Guber had been causing huge losses to Columbia for 2 years. If it were Eric, he would have wanted Peter Guber to leave. However, when Sony received Peter Guber's resignation threat, they actually compromised and even replaced a senior executive of Sony's US branch. It's almost done in Europe. I have recently read the information about Asia. After Eric sent the information to them, he leaned on the sofa and said, "In order to suppress the dumping of Hong Kong films, several countries in Southeast Asia have introduced stricter and stricter restrictions in recent years. However, they have relaxed the entry threshold for Hollywood films. This is very good news for us." Although this matter had nothing to do with Sony, Katzenberg still carefully read the information in his hand and said, "Eric, Sony has already noticed this matter. They did not take any measures because of the pressure from various parties. However, I think it's about time. In my opinion, Columbia's distribution channels in Southeast Asia are not much better than ours. Those resources are like chicken ribs. We don't need to test the Japanese's bottom line." "I understand." Eric nodded and smiled. "Look at the last page. I only plan to get Columbia's branch in Asia." The other 4 people turned to the last page of the information. "The mainland of China?" "Yeah." Eric nodded. He did not expect Columbia to have a branch in China. Even Disney only had a nominal office. Firefly had not even contacted them for film cooperation. Michael Lin asked, "Eric, do you think there is potential for development there?" Eric smiled and said, "I can't give you an accurate answer. I only know that there are 17 billion people there." The other 4 people couldn't help but look at each other. As executives of film companies, they certainly knew the situation on the other side of the ocean. The extremely closed market there had been subconsciously ignored by Hollywood. But when they heard Eric say 17 billion people, they couldn't help but feel a little moved. If a country with such a huge population base could open up the film market, what would happen? "I think we can give it a try." Katzenberg was the first to speak. "They have been trying to open up the market. This is the best time to lay out the plan in advance. And even if we fail, we won't lose anything." "Then what should we do?" Jeffrey asked, also a little moved. "First, we'll take over Columbia's branch there and establish contact. Then, we'll try to get a share of the profits. If that doesn't work, we can get the right to release it in theaters there. Tornado is very suitable. This movie doesn't have any inappropriate plot, nor is it biased. In short, what we need to do is to cultivate the market. This doesn't require us to spend much effort, but it will definitely bring us unexpected results," Eric said with a smile. After discussing for half an hour and working out some details of the implementation, they got off work together. "Are you going to the premiere of Stranger in Disguise later?" Jeffrey asked as the two stood in the elevator together. Eric nodded and said with a smile, "I have to go. That girl has been nagging me for a few days. Otherwise, I would be in Hawaii now. I've seen the sample of Stranger in Disguise. How should I put it? This movie is a little too noisy and a little brainless. It's very strange," Jeffrey commented as he recalled. "This is not a movie for an audience of your age," Eric said with a smile. "And you're talking about the style of Stranger in Disguise. I plan to make a movie like this from the beginning. Also, the biggest highlight of this movie is Jim Carrey's performance." "Then how much do you think we can get at the box office this time?" Jeffrey asked the question he was most concerned about. Eric thought for a while and said, 100 million shouldn't be a problem. If there is no competition from Tornado, and Batman Returns, it should be higher. Jeffrey opened his mouth but did not say his estimate. He shook his head and said with a smile, I really don't know where you get your confidence from. $100 million is already quite high. As the two chatted, Jeffrey rejected Eric's invitation to attend the premiere of Stranger in Disguise and drove away alone. Eric also got into his car and drove to the China Grand Theater, where the premiere was held. At 5 o'clock, the bell finally rang. Brittany, who had been in a daze with her chin resting on her hand, immediately perked up. She packed her bag and left the classroom with the crowd. Although she was a child star on the Disney Channel, Brittany and the other actors still had to go to school. Also, in order to deal with the Actors Association and the Protection of Minors Act, Disney had to arrange regular tutoring for their actors. For Brittany, who loved to play, all of this was torture. After leaving the school building, Brittany was about to take her bicycle home when Christina ran over from the other direction. When Christina got close, Brittany asked with a smile, "What's the matter, Christina?" Christina took out 2 tickets from her uniform pocket with a smile. Tickets to the premiere of Stranger in Disguise. Drew gave them to me. Do you want to go? Brittany's smile faded a little. She stared at the tickets in Christina's hand and said, Drew gave them to you. Why didn't I know? Christina's smile didn't change, but she was a little smug when she saw Brittany's expression. If Drew hadn't specifically told her that the tickets were for the 2 of them, Christina wouldn't even have told Brittany, the little fool, about it. Are you going or not? If not, I'll call my other friends. Christina had no intention of explaining. Although Drew had said that the tickets were for the 2 of them, if Brittany didn't want to go, what could she do? Brittany looked at the smug look on Christina's face and wanted to reject her impulsively. But after thinking about it, she said, All right, but I have to call home first. How troublesome. Christina pouted and said, Then hurry up. Oh, and if we meet Drew, we might be able to attend the party after the premiere. You'd better tell your mother. Maybe Drew will invite us to stay at his house tonight. Brittany thought of the spacious room, game room, and swimming pool in the Beverly Hills mansion, and compared it to her small bedroom. She immediately got excited. After Brittany called home, she was about to walk to her bicycle when Christina pulled her back. You're not going to ride there, are you? What else can I do? Brittany blinked. Don't embarrass yourself. Come with me. Christina pulled Brittany out of the small door and pointed at a taxi not far away. Of course we're taking a taxi. It's my treat. Brittany was unhappy with Christina's smug look and said, You don't have to treat. We'll split the bill. Up to you. Christina walked up and greeted the driver. She opened the door to the passenger seat and got in. Brittany pouted but had no choice but to sit in the back seat unwillingly. The 2 girls got out of the car together and saw the long red carpet in front of the China Grand Theater. There were also celebrities who were being photographed on the red carpet. Brittany looked at the exquisite white gown of the female celebrity on the red carpet and said enviously, So beautiful. These are just the small celebrities that Firefly invited to warm up the atmosphere. The big ones are behind them, Christina said, looking like a little know-it-all. Brittany didn't want to be looked down upon by Christina. She quickly put away her envious expression and looked around. She couldn't help but ask softly, Hey, do you think we'll be able to see Mr. Williams tonight? Who knows? Christina shook her head and stood on her tiptoes to look at the end of the red carpet. But the possibility of Mr. Williams attending the premiere is very high. He's with Drew Ann. Christina immediately shut her mouth. She didn't want to share the little secret that she had observed with Brittany. However, Brittany didn't ask her about it. She continued, Have you seen Tornado? It's amazing. I want to watch it a few more times. Too bad I don't have that much pocket money. If we can go to Sharp Corner Manor again, we'll definitely be able to watch it as many times as we want in the private screening room, Christina said. Then let's beg Drew to bring us there again, okay? Brittany said innocently. Christina glanced at the silly girl beside her in disdain and didn't answer. However, she was looking forward to it. However, Drew didn't bring them there and Christina was smart enough not to ask. In her eyes, Drew was much smarter than the silly girl beside her. It was hard for her to guess what Drew was thinking. Brittany, on the other hand, could guess what he was going to do just by looking at his expression. The two girls didn't enter the screening room in advance. Instead, they stayed near the red carpet like the other fans and counted the stars excitedly. Look, it's Mr. Williams and Drew. When the premiere was about to start, Brittany's sharp eyes saw two figures coming out of the limousine at the end of the red carpet. When Drew held Eric's arm and slowly walked to them, Brittany immediately waved her little hand and greeted them. Eric waved at the crowd and easily saw the two little girls. He even winked at the two little girls. Stranger in Disguise was a PG-13 movie, which meant that it was meant for parents. Although it was recommended that parents watch it, it wasn't as restrictive as R-rated movies. Therefore, it wasn't strange for the two girls to show up at the premiere. After walking through the red carpet and into the theater, Eric asked, "I see Boo and Chris. Did you invite them?" Drew pouted in dissatisfaction and snorted, "Boo, you call me so affectionately." Eric had just subconsciously used a more familiar name. Looking at the girl's unhappy expression, he raised his hand with a smile and patted her head. "On my hairstyle." Drew hurriedly slapped Eric's hand away. "Little girl, what hairstyle do you want?" Chapter 477. Although there was an endless stream of Jim Carrey's high box office movies in his memory, the most classic work of Jim Carrey was The Disguised Monster. The depressed bank employee, Stan, accidentally picked up a mask that could give people superpowers, which caused a series of storms. Of course, the ending was that the good guys defeated the bad guys, and the lovers became a couple. Although the plot was quite mediocre, Jim Carrey's crazy performance made the audience at the premiere laugh from time to time. Eric stared at the picture on the big screen and listened to the laughter of the audience in the theater from time to time. He couldn't help but think that if it weren't for the rise of Hollywood special effects blockbusters, perhaps Jim Carrey would have achieved the same status as Stephen Chow in Hollywood in the 1990s. Of course, this was just a thought. If a movie market could only accommodate one star, then there must be a big problem with the movie market. "What are you thinking about?" Elizabeth suddenly asked in a low voice. "Something," Eric answered vaguely, then changed the topic. "How are the preparations for Detective Airplane going?" Elizabeth was obviously a little dissatisfied with Eric's change of topic. She said perfunctorily, "It's okay, it won't affect the schedule." Eric smiled and reached out to pat the girl's leg. "Liz, don't be like this. You know, I'll definitely tell you what I can." Elizabeth looked around in a panic. After confirming that no one was looking, she pushed Eric's hand away from her leg. "Why can't I know something else?" Of course, he could not tell anyone about his future memories. Eric said, "Everyone should have some privacy." Westerners usually attach great importance to privacy, even between the most intimate of couples. Therefore, when she heard this, the gloominess in Elizabeth's heart dissipated a lot. She snorted softly and asked, "Hey, how much do you think the box office of Disguised Hero will get?" Eric pointed behind him and said, "Looking at the reaction of the audience, 100 million should not be a problem." Most of the audience who could attend the premiere were veteran movie fans who were specially invited by the movie company. If the movie had a good reaction among these people, its reputation among ordinary movie audiences would definitely not be bad. However, Elizabeth was not satisfied. "It's only 100 million. The North American box office for Tornado is estimated to be 300 million. Now the overseas box office has already reached 50 million. The total overseas box office will probably not be much lower than the North American box office. Then you have to look at the difference in cost between the two movies. The cost of Tornado is 70 million, while Stranger in Disguise is less than 30 million. Elizabeth frowned. "Something feels different. If you're really interested, you can try to make a big-budget movie in 2 years. But don't cry if you fail." "I'll give it a try." Eric smiled and said, "Let me make it clear, Firefly will not invest." You're biased. You're really enthusiastic to invest in a documentary that a woman has no chance of making money." Eric knew that Elizabeth must be talking about the documentary about the Los Angeles riots that Kathryn Bigelow was preparing. Because she needed a lot of material, Eric helped Catherine contact the Fox News network, which had accumulated a lot of news about the riots. It was not surprising that Elizabeth knew about it. Eric had heard women scolding him for being biased more than once. However, he also knew that most of these women had a little temper and were acting coquettishly. He had never mistreated any of his women. Thinking of Fox, Eric suddenly thought of another thing. Speaking of which, I suddenly thought of a movie that Fox will release at the end of the month. I think it's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What's wrong? Eric leaned over slightly and smirked. How about selling the copyright of this movie to Firefly? Name the price. In his memory, Buffy the Vampire Slayer should have been filmed for about 7 seasons. A TV series that could film for 7 seasons was definitely a classic among classics. Eric did not expect that the movie version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was broadcast in 1997 in the original space-time, would appear as early as 1992. When Elizabeth saw Eric's expression, she immediately raised her vigilance. She subconsciously thought of the film copyright of Golden Jade League that Eric once got from Fox. Firefly only spent a few million on the film copyright, but because of Sleepless in Seattle, the old film became popular and the videotape of Golden Jade League sold more than 2 million boxes, and Firefly also made tens of millions. Thinking of this, Elizabeth decisively refused. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Okay. Eric shrugged and sat up straight. A moment later, Elizabeth couldn't help but be curious. She asked, "Hey, what do you want to do?" "Sell the copyright to me first, then I'll tell you," Eric said with a smile. If you don't want to tell me, then I won't tell you. I'll tell Fox later. I won't give you the copyright of this movie even if it's ruined." "Then let's keep it for now," Eric said. Anyway, even if they really got the adaptation rights of this movie immediately, Firefly did not have any plans to produce more TV series for the time being. This year, in addition to several major blockbusters, Firefly had a total of 5 or 6 small and medium productions. In addition to the TV shows Friends, the company was completely operating at full capacity. Perhaps in a few years, when Firefly had its own TV station, he would find a way to get it. Thinking of the TV station, Eric's thoughts deviated a lot. Now the 3 major TV stations were in a state of independent operation. They had not yet merged with any of the big 6, so it was a good time to acquire them. However, Eric knew that after the new century, the 3 major public TV stations were not in a good situation. The prosperity of the internet was one of the reasons, but more importantly, the rise of cable TV stations. Therefore, he had been thinking about whether Firefly should focus on developing cable TV stations or acquire one of the 3 major TV stations. Seeing that Eric was scared out of his wits again, Elizabeth kicked him with her leg before turning to the big screen. Unknowingly, the disguised genius had already come to an end. Stan and Tina stood side by side on the bridge, threw the magic mask into the river, and hugged their loved ones. When the crowd applauded, Eric said to Elizabeth, "I won't participate in the party later, you host it." "No, Eric, it's only 10 o'clock. Before Elizabeth answered, Drew's voice sounded from the other side. Most of the people who attended the party after the premiere were the main cast, and some guests who were specially invited to the premiere. There were no important people to deal with, so Eric was too lazy to join in the fun. "I have something to do tomorrow, you guys have fun." Eric patted the girl's shoulder comfortingly. After a simple curtain call ceremony, just as Eric was about to leave from the backstage, Drew came up with a little dress, followed by 2 little tails. "Hi, Boo Chris," Eric greeted the 2 girls. Seeing that Brittany was not only wearing her school uniform, but also carrying a small school bag, he asked curiously, "Isn't it summer vacation now? Do you still have school?" I have remedial classes, Mr. Williams," Brittany replied timidly when she heard Eric talking to her. Although American schools did not have the tradition of remedial classes during summer vacation, there were exceptions to everything. Brittany and Christina were both small-time Disney actors, so they must have missed a lot of homework, so it was normal for them to attend remedial classes during summer vacation. Although he realized what was going on, Eric still teased with a smile, "I heard that those who attend remedial classes during summer vacation are not good students." Brittany opened her little mouth and suddenly had an idea. She pointed at Christina beside her and said, "Chris is attending remedial classes too." Eric almost laughed out loud. The little girl obviously did not hear his teasing. He glanced at Christina, who was wearing a beautiful light blue dress, and did not look like she had just come out of school. He could not help but reach out and rub the girl's little head. She doesn't look like a good student at all. Christina, of course, could tell that Eric was teasing them. She was neither flustered nor angry. She stuck out her little tongue cutely, and did not mind that Eric ruffled her hair. She shrunk her neck slightly and squinted her slender eyes slightly like a cute kitten. Seeing Christina's expression, Eric suddenly had a sense of déjà vu. He inadvertently glanced at Drew beside him, and realized that Christina was obviously imitating Drew. Sigh, they were all little vixens. It's already so late, you should go back. I'll get someone to send you guys back. Huh. The one who spoke was the innocent Brittany. She had thought that Drew would bring them back to his mansion in Beverly Hills tonight. Hearing Brittany's confusion, Eric looked at Drew and asked, "What's wrong?" Drew hugged the two little girls and said with a smile, "I'm bringing them back to my place. Eric, do you want to come?" Eric quickly shook his head. "Forget it. In that case, let's go back as soon as possible. Don't stay out too late. Don't forget to send them to class tomorrow. Got it? You're nagging like an old man." Eric reached out and knocked the girl's head. "Speaking of which, I haven't settled the score with you for teaching little Emma the wrong way. Hee, I heard about it. Julia said that you embarrassed yourself." As they chatted, they came to the parking lot together. Drew used the excuse that he didn't drive to get into Eric's car with the two little girls. There were two bodyguards in the front seat, so Eric had to squeeze in the back seat with the three little girls. They squeezed all the way to the entrance of Drew's mansion. Eric didn't get out of the car. Instead, he chased the three little girls out of the car. After a simple goodbye, he told the driver to drive home. It wasn't until Eric's SUV disappeared that the three girls entered Drew's mansion. Brittany was carefree and happy, but Christina was a little disappointed that Eric didn't stay the night. The girl had always hoped that she could spend more time with Eric. Being able to please this big shot in Hollywood was much better than simply staying the night. "Did you learn it well?" Drew reached out and put his arm around Christina's little shoulder as they walked along the corridor of the mansion. "Huh. What?" Christina wanted to play dumb. Drew reached out and pinched the girl's cheek. "He's praising you. You learned it well." Christina knew that she was caught imitating Drew's cute expression. She didn't know if Drew was really praising her, so she nervously twitched the corner of her mouth and showed a fawning smile. "I just think that looks good. And Eric likes it too," Drew added with a smile. This time, Christina didn't answer. Brittany, on the other hand, had an adorable look on her face. She had no idea what the two were talking about. Drew didn't intend to enlighten this silly girl. In fact, being a little stupid had its benefits. It would be boring if he raised two identical Lolas. Tina Fey didn't hear the sound of the car in the courtyard. She was startled when she heard the door open. She was relieved when she noticed that it was Drew who came in with the two girls. She didn't go to the premiere with Drew. Instead, she stayed at home. Tina Fey wasn't surprised to see Drew come back with the two girls. She always thought that Drew was still a child when he interacted with the two girls. "Why are you guys back? Isn't there a party?" Tina Fey stood up from the sofa and asked curiously. Drew leaned lazily on the sofa and waved his little hand. "This kind of party is boring. Plus, Eric left early. It's even more boring, so I came back in his car." "Eric, he's here too?" Tina Fey glanced outside the door. "Don't look. He's already gone," Drew said with a teasing tone. "Help me get a glass of juice. I'm thirsty." "Let me." Christina, who had already sat down, stood up politely and walked to the fridge. Tina Fey looked at the girl's action and shook her head slightly. She sat back on the sofa and casually picked up the documents she was reading and placed them on her knees. "It's already so late. You're still reading these things?" Drew came over and glanced at the documents in front of Tina Fey with a smile. "I don't have anything else to do anyway," Tina Fey said casually. She didn't really like watching TV. Plus, Drew gave her a high salary, so Tina Fey subconsciously worked very hard. Sigh, Tina. The more you do, the lazier I'll be. I'm really scared that you'll quit one day. What should I do then? Drew leaned beside Tina Fey and reached out his little arm to hug the girl's waist. He rubbed his head against her as he said. Tina Fey smiled and shook her slim waist. She smiled and said, "You're giving me such a high salary. I can't bear to quit." You still can't bear to leave Eric, right? Drew immediately teased her. Tina Fey blushed and her gaze drifted away. Tina, do you want that ring? Drew suddenly asked. Tina Fey almost threw the documents in her hand away when she heard the question. When Jerry Bruckheimer heard Eric's words, he had a thoughtful look on his face. Eric continued, "If it were me, I'd rather buy a mountain. When the time comes, I'll bring my friends to the foot of a towering mountain, point at the clouds and say, 'Look, this mountain is mine.'" Jerry Bruckheimer could not help but laugh as he imagined the scene described by Eric. After the yacht gradually left Oahu, Jerry Bruckheimer looked at the group of assistants on the deck and winked at Eric. The two of them went into the cabin. Eric, according to the current box office trend of several movies, the box office of Firefly Pictures should be able to exceed $500 million this summer, right? Eric knew that Jerry Bruckheimer would not say this for no reason. He nodded silently and sat down with Jerry on the seat near the window. "I've seen the movie release schedule of Firefly and Disney. At the end of the year, Firefly will release Speed, Detective Airplane, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is a collaboration with Sony. Disney will also release another animated film. The box office of animated films has always been very stable. Therefore, the box office number at the end of the year will not be much worse than that of the summer. Coupled with the box office accumulation of small and medium-sized productions in the non-popular schedule, Firefly Pictures' box office share this year is likely to far exceed Warner's, reaching 30%. Eric had almost understood the meaning of Jerry Bruckheimer's words. He asked with a smile, "Jerry, did someone ask you to pass on a message?" Jerry Bruckheimer nodded. "Mr. Martin Davis from Paramount. As you know, I have always worked with Paramount. What does he want?" Eric asked bluntly. Jerry Bruckheimer smiled and said, "If you agree, Mr. Davis will come to meet you in person. As for what you want to talk about, it's not my concern." "Well, I'll call Mr. Davis when I have time." Eric nodded and said. Jerry Bruckheimer's meaning was obvious. Firefly's movie performance was too outstanding, and it would definitely cause a backlash from several other film companies. Martin Davis asked Jerry Bruckheimer to pass on a message at this time, undoubtedly because he wanted to cooperate with Firefly. After all, few people would actively choose to be hostile when there was a win-win situation. "Eric, as far as I'm concerned, I actually think you can separate Pixar Animation Studio and Digital Domain from the Firefly system and set up two separate companies." Eric smiled and shook his head. "Jerry, I finally condensed Firefly into a whole. How can I take the initiative to remove the limbs?" Jerry Bruckheimer was stunned. He seemed to think that Eric's words made sense, but he felt that something was not quite right. Eric did not look at Jerry Bruckheimer's expression. He turned his head to look at the sea outside the window and said faintly, "Since the rise of the giants in the 20s and 30s, Hollywood has been accustomed to the structure of the 6, 7, or 8 giants, but it does not mean that this should be the norm in Hollywood. In the United States, General Motors can be the dominant company, Bell can be the dominant company, ExxonMobil can be the dominant company, and even Walmart, which has only been established for 30 years, can be the dominant company. In this case, why can't Hollywood be the dominant company?" When Jerry Bruckheimer heard this, he faintly felt a slight shattering sound. He had joined Hollywood since the early 70s, and it had been nearly 20 years since then. Unconsciously, he had become accustomed to the coexistence of several giants in Hollywood. However, Eric's words made Jerry Bruckheimer realize that this rule was not unbreakable. Eric, then why has Hollywood always maintained this coexistence of several giants? Jerry Bruckheimer asked almost subconsciously. Eric thought for a moment and said, probably because of the ups and downs in performance. Movies are different from other industries. For example, Walmart has developed a distribution system that is ahead of its peers, so it has dominated the entire United States in just 30 years. When Walmart has already occupied the market, other competitors, even if they completely imitate Walmart's model, can't reach Walmart's scale. But movie companies are different. The measure of a movie company's strength is ultimately the box office, and the box office is the most unstable thing. Maybe a movie company will produce several hit movies in a certain period of time, just like when Barry Diller took over Paramount. But for various reasons, that situation will certainly not last long. Other movie companies are not idle either. Maybe they will produce movies with high box office from time to time. In this way, it is difficult to reach the situation where one company is the dominant company. After saying this, Eric smiled confidently and said, but at Firefly, this situation will definitely continue. So one day, I will let them get used to something. Jerry Bruckheimer smiled but did not agree with Eric. Since the performance of other movie companies would fluctuate, how could Firefly not appear? Eric did not take what Martin Davis of Paramount told him through Jerry Bruckheimer too seriously. Firefly had now developed to a quite stable state of mind. Such a big movie company could not be defeated by dishonest means. If you wanted to defeat a movie company, you could only rely on movies. But when it came to movies, Eric was confident that no movie company in Hollywood had the strength to do so. However, he did not ignore Martin Davis's message. That night, Eric called Martin Davis, who was far away in Los Angeles, and agreed to have a chat. As for whether they could reach a cooperation, it depended on Paramount's sincerity. Eric knew that when MGM was ignored, Disney was annexed by Firefly, and Universal and Columbia were acquired by the Japanese consortium. The only choice for outsiders to enter Hollywood was to acquire Paramount. According to the memory of his previous life and some information collected before, after Lei Sherdong of Viacom failed to compete with Eric for Disney, he directly shifted his target to Paramount. Barry Diller left Fox and started his own business for a period of time. He soon thought of returning to Hollywood. He joined forces with several companies and began to sound out Paramount's shareholders. Although Paramount's performance in recent years was not very good, with such a shell, Paramount could rise again at any time as long as it could pull in high-quality film projects. Therefore, Martin Davis did not have much intention to sell Paramount. Unfortunately, Paramount was a listed company. Although Martin Davis was the company's largest shareholder, if other movie companies adopted a hostile takeover to annex Paramount, the other shareholders of Paramount were likely to agree to the other party's high-priced acquisition and choose to cash out at a high price if Paramount's performance was not ideal. This was probably why Martin Davis suddenly contacted Eric. When the Japanese acquired Columbia and Universal, the two movie companies had a short cooperation with Firefly and achieved good results. Although the two companies were sold in the end, the Japanese spent a lot of dollars. Martin Davis's thoughts were very clear. He just wanted to improve Paramount's performance and prevent other shareholders from choosing to sell the company. With the Eastern European film market gradually opening up and the annual box office in North America continuing to increase, it was understandable that Martin Davis did not want to sell Paramount. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.